Evening and welcome to tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I am Council Member Nicole Spear. Thank you so much for joining us. We have on tonight's agenda 2 items. The first is the Excel Partnership Update. The second item is Council Process Working Group, full council direction on process improvement items. Before we get into our first item, I will outline how I will conduct the meeting. First, we will hear a presentation. Please hold your questions until the presentation is complete. At the end of the presentation, I will give us some time to ask clarifying questions. Then we will discuss our responses to the staff questions from the memo. I will now turn to our City Manager, Nuria Rivera-Vandermeide, to introduce our first item.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Spear, and good evening, council members, staff, community members, and our colleagues from Excel Energy, as well as members of our advisory panel. Tonight's study session is an important opportunity to reflect on the City of Boulder's partnership with Excel Energy as we mark 5 years since the franchise agreement was signed. And when we think about energy, when we talk about Excel, right, the reality is our partnership encompasses so much more than that. It impacts nearly every aspect of our city's operation and long-term goals, from transportation and planning to emergency services and economic development. The city's climate and resilience goals are deeply connected to how we work with Excel to reduce emissions, transition to renewable energy, and mitigate risks such as wildflowers. Oops, I'm looking at Councilmember Spears, Taisha, Councilmember Adams's background, such as wildfires and power outages. Excel's infrastructure investments, including undergrounding power lines and modernizing the grid, are critical to our city's ability to maintain essential services and prepare for changing climate. We'll be discussing how the partnership has evolved, where we're seeing progress, and where there are opportunities for improvement. A key focus tonight will be on the future state of the franchise agreement, how we ensure this partnership continues to align with Boulder's energy goals and community priorities. I want to thank you, Council, in advance for sharing your interest in advancing this study session as we heard a wide range of interests: system reliability, wildfire risk reduction, equitable energy access, and the city's long-term role in energy planning. We also know those concerns mirror those we've heard from community about how Excel is addressing safety, reliability, and cost, and how we as a city can continue to leverage this partnership to meet our community's needs while ensuring that Excel remains a strong and accountable partner. Before turning it over to staff, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank the Excel Energy team for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time and continued commitment to this collaboration and look forward to tonight's discussion with council and community. With that, I'll turn it over to staff who will provide an overview of the partnership's progress, highlight key areas for discussion, and address any questions you may have. Our own amazing Director of Climate Initiatives, Jonathan Cohen, will do the honors and kick us off. Jonathan, to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nuria. That was a nice introduction. Good evening, Mayor, Council, colleagues, and of course, community members that are watching tonight. As Nuria said, my name is Jonathan Cohen. I am honored to serve as the Director of the Climate Initiatives Department here at the city. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to update Council and of course, the community on the Boulder Excel partnership this evening. So I'll repeat a couple of things that Nuria said, but just to say that our goal this evening is really to provide an update on the partnership activities, where we are today, looking at some opportunities for improvement. And again, like Nuria said, really look to the future state of the partnership to make sure we continue to serve the needs of Boulder residents, businesses, as well as Excel. I also really want to extend my gratitude to Excel representatives for their willingness to be here this evening, and of course, for their ongoing partnership. We all know these are really important conversations and value the opportunity for council to engage openly with Excel representatives. So joining us in tonight's presentation are Robert Kenny, who is the president of Excel Energy's Colorado Operating Company, Andrew Holder, the Director of Community Relations and Local Government Affairs, and Nicholas Cole, who is our Boulder Area Manager. We'll get to their presentation in just a few moments. There's also quite a few folks from Excel that I didn't name, but I really want to acknowledge and appreciate the hours upon hours our teams spend together and what value each of them brings to the partnership. I also want to share a warm appreciation for the members of the advisory panel who have volunteered a lot of their time to help guide this work. We have a few, I believe one or two folks here from the panel. I saw Wayne Seltzer had joined. We may have a few others, but they're here to help address any questions, provide additional insights that council might have. And finally, I'm almost done thanking people, bear with me. I especially want to thank and appreciate so many of our community members who have been instrumental in advancing our community's progress in this space. So here's the plan for tonight. You'll have about 15 minutes from staff, about 15 minutes from Excel. We'll review the two questions that we have for you all and hope to spend the remaining time really in conversation. So Carolyn, if you would mind, let's go ahead and pull up the slides. Oh, I love it when technology works. Okay. So I wanted to start, I actually thought it would be a good idea to share a bit of background for those who may be newer to this topic. Xcel Energy is an electricity and natural gas utility serving customers throughout Colorado, including the Boulder community, of course. I think as most are aware, Boulder and Xcel have had a complex history with the city exploring the creation of its own electric utility for over a decade in pursuit of greater control. So about 5 years ago in 2020, after extensive community discussion, Boulder and Xcel entered into a new franchise and energy partnership agreement that really is intended to outline a set of shared priorities. So if you look at the screen, at the center of the partnership was really a commitment to collaborate and implement local projects and programs that are intended to accelerate emissions reductions, to improve reliability and resiliency, look at innovative solutions that are accessible and affordable to all customers. And specifically, the partnership is oriented to support our local targets of 100% renewable electricity and 100 megawatts of local installed renewable generation, both by the year 2030. I should also say that our teams focus on solutions that are replicable and scalable. And what I mean by that is that they are solutions that benefit or have benefit beyond Boulder's boundaries. So the concept of incubating new ideas in Boulder was always a key point and continues to be of the agreement. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that we hear somewhat frequently is how decisions are made and who makes them. So to deliver on the goals that are identified in the partnership agreement, a governance structure was really created to provide input and oversight of the partnership. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the graphic and kind of work my way up, aligning with those arrows. So first are the project teams. They are different groups that are comprised of staff from the city and Xcel. And the purpose is to really define the scope of projects, including timelines, key performance indicators, and project costs. The next box up is that community advisory panel that I already mentioned. So this is an appointed group of community stakeholders, including residents, businesses, the university, and other local organizations. And the role of the advisory panel is to connect the community to the partnership by really representing discrete customer voices. So the panel reviews project proposals. They spend a lot of time really providing insight into community impacts and making recommendations to the partnership's project oversight team, which is the next box up. So the oversight team is responsible for the implementation of the programs and projects, and it's comprised of city and Xcel staff, again, working collaboratively with implementation teams, subject matter experts, and the advisory panel. And then finally, at the top is the executive team, which represents city and Xcel leadership and departmental directors. And the responsibility of the executive team is really around oversight of the partnership agreement. And that includes things like communication, collaboration, and really steering the overall direction of the partnership efforts. Let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. Okay, so don't panic. This is a busy slide. What I will note is this chart that you're looking at is actually on page 4 of your staff memo, if you want to follow along. So the franchise agreement and energy partnership have an effective term of 20 years that began January 1st of 2021. There are provisions that allow the community to terminate the franchise prior to the full term. And one of those provisions occurs on the 5, 10, and 15-year anniversaries, and the other is tied to emission reductions. Both of these opt-outs can occur either through a two-thirds vote by city council or through a community ballot. Because we are at the first 5-year anniversary mark, Council has expressed interest in understanding the details of the opt-out provisions. And while staff is not recommending Council exercise an opt-out, tonight's packet includes quite a bit of detail on the variety of decision points. So the slide simply summarizes the dates and provisions, and we do know that there is a desire by some in the community to exercise the opt-out, so it was important to provide Council with the process details. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so looking ahead, I would say that like any complex relationship, there are always opportunities for improvement. And I really want to acknowledge that our teams are focused on strengthening the partnership, refining how we work together, and addressing what I describe as emerging challenges. So again, as you heard Nuria say, a key focus tonight will be on that future state of the agreement and how we ensure this partnership continues to align with our own priorities as well as Excel's priorities. So we know that there are community concerns about addressing safety and reliability and cost. And while we may only be 5 years into this agreement, the landscape has already shifted significantly from when it was first established. What I mean by that is that climate disruption is more present than ever. I would say that we are dealing with the growing threats of extreme weather events. We're dealing with concerns around an aging grid infrastructure, all while our reliance on reliable electricity continues to increase. And so I put this slide up just to really highlight the fact that our aim is to really address issues related to clean, affordable, resilient, equitable, and safe energy. And so I would conclude some of the remarks on this slide by saying maintaining reliable electricity isn't just about keeping the lights on. It's about protecting public health. It's about ensuring that critical infrastructure remains operational. It's about keeping people connected in times of crisis and preventing widespread economic disruptions affecting businesses and schools and productivity. So there are a lot of strategies to enhance resilience. We hear things around system upgrades, on-site generation, energy storage, microgrids. I will just remark that this is not solely a utility problem, so the solutions cannot rest on the utility actions alone. We really need to think about a collaborative community-wide approach, and that's really going to be essential to building a more resilient and adaptive energy system. And I know Excel's eager to speak about their ongoing efforts to balance wildfire risk mitigation with reliable power supply, so we'll get to that in just a moment. So with that future focus in mind, I'd like to invite Carolyn to share some highlights and progress, and I'll rejoin later to introduce the questions we have for Council this evening. But before I hand it over, I have to take a moment for one more round of appreciation. I really want to sincerely thank our incredible internal staff team across multiple departments, including City Manager's Office, the City Attorney's Office, and for my team, especially Matt Lehrman, Emily Sandoval, Lex Teleshak, and last but not least, the amazing Carolyn Elam, who oversees the partnership. So Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thumbs up, you can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Technology is working well tonight, so very much appreciated. Again, thank you, Mayor, Council, and Jonathan. I'm Carolyn Elam. I'm a Senior Manager in our Climate Initiatives Department, and as Jonathan mentioned, I am tasked with managing our day-to-day activities within the partnership. And, I want to echo Jonathan's appreciation that he expressed. I could not do this without the strength of my team and my extended team, including some of our partners at Boulder County. And I also really want to appreciate our facilitation team that we brought in from the Institute for the Built Environment out of CSU, as well as Excel's Partners in Energy team, the Brendel Group, who have been just really instrumental in working with us in advancing this work. To Jonathan's point, these are busy slides sometimes, so not trying to dive in too much, and we're not going to detail this, but I do want to take a moment to really talk about the evolution of our work together within the partnership. When we launched the Energy Partnership at the beginning of 2021, there was an effort through the creation of that Energy Partnership to lay out a broad swath of areas we might work together. We spent a substantial part of our early time together really trying to turn that broad swath into actual actionable items. And I really want to appreciate our advisory panel who really tasks us with bringing clarity to the work plan, what the partnership work was going to consist of, the targets that affect each area, how we were going to measure success. And so we did publish this work plan in 2023 to cover the period from 2023 through 2025. We highlighted the 6 focus areas you see here on the slide. Energy efficiency and building electrification very closely intertwined together, transportation electrification, our goals around local renewable generation and storage and resilience within that, grid supplied electricity, and then overall resilience. And then the bar chart you're seeing is some analysis that was conducted to understand how our work in each of these tranches could contribute towards the city's emissions reduction goals, which again are a 70% emissions reduction by 2030 as compared to our 2018 baseline, towards a trajectory of carbon neutrality by 2035. So as you look at this, we've created different sub areas within each of these focus areas. The idea here is not that at any given time there's a project or partnership project in play for every single area. What this work plan does is it really guides the roadmap for how we'll work together, how we'll prioritize work, how we'll review the projects that come up, and how we can move forward together. This is not exhaustive of the accomplishments, but I wanted to provide just a little flavor to support our conversation today. And I know there was obviously a lot of interest in undergrounding. There was a settlement provision when we launched into the franchise around making up for the 10 years we were out of franchise, plus incremental additions to our 1% undergrounding fund. You know, I want to really appreciate our partners at Excel. We still did not have commission approval, and we had already launched the very first undergrounding project, which was the North Broadway project that you see in the upper left. This was really an important opportunity for us to move those overhead lines underground while we were doing the concrete paving on that road. So really appreciate the hard work that went into that. That was the very first project that we'd done in close to 15 years. So really a success. We've done we finished one other project, which was the 19th Street. And for anybody who's been out by the hospital, you've probably seen the work going on around East Arapahoe to move those lines underground. All of these projects are really conducted to support our other public works projects. So in these cases, these are all mobility related projects. So East Arapahoe is really to support our expansion of the multi-use path there. 19th Street was as well. But Chautauqua is the one that we are just starting now, and really excited to have this partnership with the Chautauqua organization, who's bringing dollars to this as well, to really move all of the overhead lines that are up in the Chautauqua and leasehold areas, as well as the lines running up to our tank that sits in that area just south of the Chautauqua underground. This is really around community resilience and wildfire risk reduction. So a very different flavor of project than has historically been done with the 1% funds. This project is just starting this year. So you're going to start to see activity starting with the water tank. The next phase will start to do some of the perimeter undergrounding on the edge of the leasehold. And then the team will start to move into the leasehold area. These 4 projects combined will represent at least the $16+ million that were part of the first 5 years, and may extend into some of the other ones. So we're definitely well on track with the commitments that were made. So really excited to have these projects go forward. I've been here talking to you about streetlights a few times, so I won't dive into this too much, but we now are the proud owners of approximately 4,400 streetlights. And as you saw recently, we are launching the project to start to retrofit those. So really exciting. Within the partnership context, we started this project with Excel, looking at our values and our goals around the street lighting system, and coming up together with what the best pathway was to achieve those goals. And that's where we mutually decided that the city acquiring the system was the best pathway forward. And we worked together over the past several years to make that happen. Closing the gap on our emissions, this was a very important priority within the partnership agreement. So how do we go from where Excel is going to be in 2030 system-wide to our community goal of emissions-free electricity by 2030? So there have been a number of efforts that have focused in on that. The very first one out of the gate was the passing of Senate Bill 21261. This was a bill developed by Senator Fenberg that really advanced access to solar energy. This was a partnership goal laid out in the very early outline. It increased how much solar you can put on your rooftop. It improved how you can take credit for the solar and the net metering. It also enhanced opportunities for more solar for multifamily properties and larger commercial projects. So a lot was accomplished through just that one legislation. Together, we've been working really closely to understand like how to further close the gap on the grid emissions. We've talked about this zero emissions community project, which is really looking at what is a 24/7 solution where every hour of the day, every day of the year, we can have emissions free electricity. Together, we've learned a tremendous amount. And I would say our work together has really advanced and matured our thinking, not just ourselves, but stakeholders, as well as our utility partners, to really understand the nuances of, and I know that our team will probably talk about this some more, what it means to try and eke out those last remaining emissions in those few hours a day and few days a year where we aren't going to already be emissions free just naturally from where Excel is going to be in 2030. So more work to be done, but really a lot of successful work. And then I want to give a shout out to our advisory panel and our community members. There is one project that we'll be launching this year, which starts to provide a lot more tools to community members, businesses, to understand how they are making energy choices and what that means in terms of emissions. So when they charge their car, when they use electricity, so lots of more public facing dashboards that provide forecasting. These were ideas that our community brought forward and worked with Excel and us to really advance. And really excited to see some of these just on the cusp of starting to be introduced into the marketplace this year. I think this is my last one, but clean mobility. Really taking advantage of the transportation electrification program projects that our partners at Excel were able to offer through their approved regulatory strategy. We've been able to really drive a lot of high adoption within the Boulder community. So this just shows some of the year-over-year project progress in that regard. We continue as the Boulder community to lead in EV adoption as well as charging infrastructure deployment. So exciting to see that. And then we're on the, we've spoken to some in the community about launching our Heat Pump Accelerator pilot, which we look forward to launching this year, which is really finding ways to break down barriers, particularly for multifamily condominium complexes. So we've been working with the Shanahan Ridge community to understand how we can streamline heat pump adoption there and working with partners on a group buy opportunity. So with that, I am going to pass the mic over to our colleagues and to Robert. And Robert, I have your slides here in the deck. So if you just want to let me know when you're ready for me to advance.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just start by also adding, well, first, can you hear me okay? Can you hear us well? Excellent. Let me just add my thanks. I'm not going to list everybody because I'll invariably forget someone. But first, council members, and Mr. Mayor, thank you for inviting us to be here with you all tonight. We look forward to presenting and just looking forward to the dialogue. And then to Jonathan and Carolyn and Nuria and everybody at Boulder, thank you for your partnership. You know, I joined the company a little less than 3 years ago, and I have found that this partnership has worked extraordinarily well. I have also discovered that we candidly have much more in common than that which separates us, which is maybe something that's true for all of our endeavors in the world. So I'm really encouraged by what we've been able to accomplish so far, and I'm looking forward to this presentation tonight. We can go to the next slide, please. So this slide is really just intended to illustrate. You guys have characterized it as clean, affordable, resilient, equitable, and safe. I think this is another way of depicting and stating our shared goals and values as a company. We strive every day to provide safe, reliable, affordable, and increasingly clean energy to the 1.6 million electric and 1.5 million gas customers we serve. And so we're very much aligned in terms of our goals and our mission. Next slide, please. This slide will look familiar because you saw it in both Jonathan and Carolyn's portion of the presentation. But again, just to reiterate that the partnership allowed us to agree upon 4 goals that we were able to codify in the agreement. And the goals are listed in the top graphic. And then it trickles down into the 6 focus areas that you see below. And those are the focus areas where we focus on our new projects and programs. We know that the partnership started in 2021, and since then we've been able to create multiple new programs and projects in partnership with the city and the advisory panel and with collaboration with the council members. Most recently, and something that we're very proud of, is the virtual power plant grant from the Department of Energy. That is our most recent project that's underway in Boulder. Next slide, please. So I know, and I've heard from you and from everyone else, and it's equally as important to us, that reducing wildfire risk is a top priority for all of our communities. And I say it's not just reducing wildfire risk, but it's protecting the public. And the things that we're doing to mitigate wildfire risk are intended to enhance public safety. That's first and foremost. So this graphic really kind of depicts all the things that we're doing around wildfire, what's depicted in our wildfire mitigation plan. As you know, we have a wildfire mitigation plan on file at the PUC. And I'll just briefly describe very quickly the buckets. The big buckets of work fall into four main categories. First is situational awareness, and that includes additional weather detection cameras that allow us to garner additional weather data. So weather cameras and other items that allow us to enhance our situational awareness, our Pano AI cameras and our weather detection stations. The second big bucket is system hardening, system strengthening, and resiliency. That includes targeted undergrounding, strategic and targeted undergrounding, replacing small conductor with larger conductor, replacing bare conductor with covered conductor, all the ways in which we're making our system stronger and hardened so that if it can withstand extreme weather events, but also allowing us to restore more quickly when there are outages caused by extreme weather events. We have operational mitigations, and I don't know if that's described on there, but yes, there we go. The enhanced power line safety settings and the tool of last resort, the public safety power shutoff. And I'll just very briefly define these terms because I know that even internally, we sometimes have a tendency to conflate the two. The enhanced power line safety settings, that refers to the change in sensitivity in the recloser settings on our power lines, making them more sensitive to items that might come into contact with a power line and preventing the reclosing device from automatically reclosing. So that is the enhanced power line safety settings. That is distinct from the PSPS, which is the public safety power shutoff. And that is an operational mitigation that we employ in the most extreme weather situations. And that requires us to proactively de-energize our lines when we see the most extreme weather events. That's a tool that we've employed only once, and that was the April 6th and 7th event. And then undergirding situational awareness, system hardening, and our operational mitigations are enhanced communications and customer support. And so we have a separate section in our wildfire mitigation plan that describes the plans for executing a PSPS and the communication protocols that accompany that. And so we know and we've acknowledged that our one and only PSPS event had significant opportunity for improvement around communications. We heard all that feedback and incorporated it into our wildfire mitigation plan. And that contemplates that we would provide much more advanced notice to our customers, our communities, our OEM partners, and others in advance of a potential PSPS around what's happening, what the outage would look like, what the polygons would look like. We're also enhancing and building our critical customer lists so that we can have greater visibility and insight into where our critical customers are. So this infographic, I think, is something that's helpful to be able to depict in one place what we're doing to help mitigate wildfire risk and to protect the public safety. Next slide, please. All right, so this is really our way of depicting how much we are aligned with you guys. And it's really kind of amazing to me to see how well aligned we are. The commission's and the state's goals for us in terms of decarbonizing our LDC, as well as more beneficial electrification, are very aligned with the goals that we already had to reduce carbon emissions from both our electric and gas systems. We filed just recently our clean heat plan. That is a first of a kind filing that demonstrates how we intend to reduce GHG emissions from our LDC, focusing significantly on beneficial electrification. And just at a glance, we've got $440 million in that plan to help advance beneficial electrification, to help those customers that want to electrify their homes and move from gas to electrification. So we have significant funding available for that. The other items that you see in here, the coal action plan, the new clean energy program, our Colorado Power Pathway, and the maintenance of reliability. These are all just indicators and additional proof points of what we're doing to help meet your goals, our shared goals, while also maintaining reliability. I'll just very briefly talk about the Colorado Power Pathway because that is an exciting transmission line that's going to allow us to unlock a lot of the renewable energy that we see on the Eastern Plains and bring that renewable energy to load centers. And just briefly, we have a heat pump program that started in 2024, and that's in the Shannon neighborhood, which is intended to increase and accelerate heat pump adoption in Boulder. Our Pearl Street non-pipeline alternative program is intended to electrify the Pearl Street Mall. We're collaborating with the city to communicate this project to the community. I'll just pause here and just say, when I first joined the company, we know that we still have a lot of customers, candidly, that are using using natural gas for home heating and cooking. And we know that there are challenges to being able to electrify whole neighborhoods and large swaths of our community. We took a significant amount of effort through our integrated system planning program to come up with a methodology by which we can analyze non-pipeline alternatives for those communities that want to move from gas to electrification. The Pearl Street NPA program is one example of that, and we're very excited about our ability to work on that with you. And we think that that can be a model and a proof of concept that we can apply to other parts of our system. Our Partners in Energy group has been tracking our demand side management program and the emission reductions and cost savings that we're achieving through that. And then our EVSI program, the Electric Vehicle Supply Infrastructure Program, we've completed 22 projects in Boulder thus far, and we have 8 additional projects scheduled for 2025. Next slide, please. All right, this is pretty exciting to me too. This is our distribution system plan. We've had to do a whole different way of thinking about how we're going to plan our distribution system. Much of this is driven by the fact that we're seeing so much beneficial electrification. Electrification of transportation is requiring us to have to significantly bolster the distribution system. We're having to bolster our entire system from generation to transmission to distribution, but the local distribution system is really the significant part of the grid that's bringing electricity to your home. And so we filed our first distribution system plan under the new distribution system planning rules at the commission just last year. That process will proceed through 2025 at the commission, but it's a significant step up in the amount of distribution capacity that we'll be adding. And you can see it here, 108 new or upgraded substation transformer banks, 35 new substations, 300 new feeders, 154 capacity projects, which will unlock and allow for 3.1 gigawatts of new capacity. And so this is something that's really exciting and something that we know is going to be necessary in order to accommodate everything that we want to do to increase our system's ability to handle more renewable electricity, more distributed electricity. And then it's also going to serve to bolster the resilience and the reliability of the system simultaneously. Just a couple of the Boulder terminal is a full substation rebuild that will provide future capacity flexibility. We're also we have these 300 new feeders. 2 of the feeders serving south of CU have been scoped to be undergrounded as a part of our wildfire program. So there's a lot of work that we're doing system-wide, but specific work that will bolster the system in Boulder. Next slide, please. So we have a distribution system plan that shows how we're going to bolster the capacity of our distribution system. And this is the reference to our just transition solicitation. This is the process at the commission that describes our load forecast for a 5-year period of time through 2030, how we've, the methodology we've used to derive that load forecast, and then how we intend to meet that load and what resources we intend to use. This is the electric resource planning process that happens at the commission. This one specifically is referred to as the just transition solicitation because it's, in addition to looking system-wide at the resources we're going to need, it's really also focusing on identifying new power at our Hayden Center and Pueblo, where we will be retiring our coal plants. And the reason we refer to it as a just transition is because we recognize that as we close these coal plants, and we'll be completely out of coal by 2030, as we close these coal plants, we know that there are coworkers there who have depended upon that plant for their livelihoods. We know that those assets provide tax base in those communities. And so our goal is to look at ways to replace the coal assets in Hayden and Pueblo with new power resources at that location. In the absence of that, we do intend to make payments in lieu of taxes. And I'm proud to say that we've closed something like 17 different coal plants across our 8-state territory. And we've been able to do that without having to lay off any of our coworkers and find new jobs for them. We hosted a webinar for the advisory panel and for the city council members on February 24th to go in more detail on the just transition solicitation. We also know, and I referred to this on the previous slide, the virtual power plant grant. That's a key project that's sponsored by the Department of Energy, and the just transition solicitation will continue to advocate for. We continue to collaborate with the city and the advisory panel, and our collaboration will be key in pushing for additional projects to meet our emission reduction goals. So the just transition solicitation, it's a 2-phase project. So we go through the methodology and we say a variety of different scenarios, but just at a very high level, and this may have been already discussed on the webinar, but we're anticipating about 14,000 megawatts of new generation to come out of this just transition solicitation. And about 7,000 of those megawatts would be wind, about 5,000 would be solar and storage. And so we expect that with the with this solicitation, whether it's a 12,000 or 14,000 megawatt portfolio, that would get us to a 90% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels and 90% renewable energy being delivered to our customers by 2031 or by the end of 2030. So it's a gigantic plan, and it's going to get us well on our way to being 90% renewable by the end of 2030. So very exciting plan. Next slide, please. Well, that's the end. So I think at this point, we move into question and answer, but thank you for the time, and I'm looking forward to answering these questions, or engaging with you on these questions.
Robert, thank you so much. I will pick it back up in a quick transition back to you, Councilmember Spear, and just wanted to go over the questions that we have for Council this evening. There are 2, and I can read these aloud if useful. I think we can leave them up on the screen, but it's always helpful just to be able to see one another. Really, the first question is to really understand from Council what areas of focus that you didn't hear tonight or that you did hear tonight would you really like to see receive greater priority within the partnership work plan for the next 5 years. So really that future look, what are areas that we need to really accelerate or prioritize? And then the second question really relates to the 5-year anniversary term. Is there any additional information or analysis that Council might need from staff or from Excel to inform an affirmative decision to continue with the franchise? So we thought it'd be good to just circle up around these 2 particular questions, but we'll turn it to you, Councilmember Spear, to open it up and love to hear the conversation. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for both of the presentations. And thank you, Mr. Kenny, for being here tonight with some of your team. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. By my calculations, we have about 80 minutes left in this part of the meeting tonight. So I was thinking we could spend about 20 minutes until 7 o'clock with some clarifying questions, because I expect that what we want to get to is more of the answering staff questions, but I know that folks will have clarifying questions too. So 2-ish, 3 minutes a piece. If we do all 3 minutes a piece, it's a little too long. So somewhere in that area. And please hold on comments for now. We will have plenty of time for that in our next hour of this item. Okay, so as you are asking your questions, please indicate to whom you are addressing your question, whether it is to Excel or whether it is to staff. And the other group will have a chance to answer the question too, but just so that it's a little bit easier to understand, please clarify who your question is addressed to. So I will now open it up to clarifying questions, not comments yet. We'll have that chance. This is just clarifying comments on the presentations or items in the memo. Who has clarifying questions? Tina, I see you up first, then Mark.
Yeah, this is a question for Excel, I think. And just hearing about the larger plan that includes more equipment and funding for equipment to switch to electrification. Has your company discussed risks from changes in the federal government where you feel that some of these plans are vulnerable or might be significantly more expensive than originally budgeted?
We have. So I'll say a couple things about it. I don't, just at a very high level, I think the things that we've paid a lot of attention to would be continuation of the investment in production tax credits that were in the Inflation Reduction Act. And we've been working collaboratively with other utilities and with our trade organization, the Edison Electric Institute, to continue to advocate for the maintenance of those tax credits. So our wind farms, part of what makes those projects more cost effective are the tax credits that are associated with those. And those are tax credits on the investment in the asset and on the production of the electrons that the wind farm will create. And we're able to monetize and sell those tax credits, but that inures to the benefit of our customers by lowering the overall cost of the project. And so what we have found is that, how do I say this? In both red and blue states, people are benefiting from the creation of these projects. And so we think that there's a good chance that those projects, that those tax credits will remain. The tariffs, we're still studying what the tariffs may or may not do in terms of adding cost to various projects. But we do think it's manageable at this point. We don't perceive that it's going to require us to cancel anything at this point.
Okay, and then a follow-up question is there a way to, because I think it's so complicated, but is there a way to get an understanding in numbers of what kind of cost savings are the people living in Boulder might realize over time through these investments as a community? So I think our goal is to ensure that the cost of living doesn't increase in Boulder to the extent that we can. So is there anything that we could see that's being projected that we can communicate?
Yeah, I think we can, and I can give you just right off the top of my head a relatively high level understanding of our wind farms in particular. Through the avoided fuel costs over a period of maybe 2017 to 2022, and I may have the time wrong, we can follow up with you, but we have savings of about $700 million in avoided fuel costs. So when we build a renewable energy project, it's capital intensive, and there's capital that has to be spent to build that project, but we're not buying natural gas or coal or other fuels to be able to power that and make electrons. And so there's the avoided fuel cost, which results in a savings to our customers of about $700 million. I think there's probably ways for us to quantify how tax credits have reduced the overall cost of various projects. And that's something we probably need to follow up on because I just don't have it in the top of my head. But those would be the two buckets of savings, would be reduction in the cost of the project attributable to tax credits, and then avoided fuel costs as attributable to renewable projects.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tina. Next up is Mark.
Okay, thank you. I assume we should not be addressing the two questions raised by staff
That's right.
earlier.
Yep, yeah, this is just clarifying questions. We'll do
Okay.
those next.
My first question is that we did not discuss one of the sort of elephants in the room. When we entered into the franchise agreement, it was with the primary purpose of reducing CO2 emissions. And in 2022, we very narrowly missed our objective. We missed it by more in 2024. What's the basis for your believing that in 2027 and 30, we're going to meet the targets we have not yet met?
And is that a question for Excel?
Probably for me.
That's an Excel question.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd say a couple things. We have very smart load forecasters and modelers that say if we add X number of megawatts of new renewables, that we would expect to reduce the tons of carbon that are emitted by Y amount. And so it's not speculative. I mean, it's based upon modeling and assumptions. But if we're adding 14,000 megawatts of new renewables, and if about 12,000 megawatts or 14,000 megawatts of new generation, and about 12,500 megawatts of that are wind, solar paired with storage, we would expect to see, and we're retiring our coal plants that will no longer emit carbon, then we would expect to see carbon emissions reduced by 90% from 2005 levels. We were at about 45% carbon free in 2024 across Colorado. I don't know how many tons we reduced of carbon. But my understanding is we did miss it, but we missed it narrowly. And so we project forward based upon the resources that we intend to add, based upon the resources we know we will be retiring. And that's why we're able to say that we think we'll be 90% carbon free with a 90% reduction in emissions by 2030.
Okay, thank you. My next question regards the public safety power shutoff. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of that pleasant event. And if we were to have in April another similar shutoff, would it still require 3 days to turn the power back on?
So I can't answer that with any level of specificity, and I'll tell you why. And I don't know that, candidly, I don't think you'd want me to, because it would be speculation. When we are, what I can tell you is that we'll give you more advance notice. And one of the things that we've committed to is to being able to give you 72 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours notice. And what I can also tell you is that we're working really closely with our offices of emergency management to make sure that we are well coordinated and that there's visibility into what we're doing. But to be very specific about would it take 3 days to restore the power, we will restore the power as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. One of the challenges when you execute a public safety power shutoff, and again, we've only done one here, but we have done them in other parts of our service territory. When the wind event ends, that is not when the power will be restored, because we have to patrol the lines. And so we think we will be able to do that more quickly than we did it last time. We will station and pre-station crews to be able to get out there and restore power as quickly as possible. But it's very challenging to say, without knowing what the scope of the event would be, without knowing how many line miles that need to be patrolled, what the restoration time would be. We're going to do it as fast as possible. We're going to do it as quickly as possible. We'll use drones and we'll use human beings to patrol, but we have to actually physically get our eyes on there, either through foot patrols or through drone inspections.
Okay, we can discuss this more during comments. I just want to point out that the discontent was not it wasn't a notice issue. It was a turning the power back on issue. And I have one more question. I've been told that it costs $4 to $6 million per mile to underground lines. And assuming that that's a correct estimate, the $1.2 million we receive every year basically buys us about a quarter of a mile of undergrounding. Is there any way for us to be accelerating that? Or for Excel to be accelerating that?
Well, I'd say two things. I don't want to affirm or disprove the $4.6 million a mile. That could be right. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of variables that determine how much it's going to cost to underground a distribution line. And let me just also be clear: we don't typically underground transmission level lines. So there's sometimes a conflation of the transmission system and the distribution system. So our high voltage transmission lines that are usually located in remote areas, that's usually a 10x cost to underground those lines. So we just don't typically underground transmission lines. It's not that we never do it. In urban centers that are heavily populated, we do that, but typically we don't underground transmission. So the cost to underground a distribution line, it is going to be more expensive. It will depend upon the topography and the location and the complication of actually doing it and what the route is. So yes, it will be more expensive. I don't know if it's always going to be $1 million a mile for overhead versus 4.6 million, because it's going to depend on the topography. The program that you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken, and these guys will keep me honest, I think that's separate and apart from the undergrounding that we've described in our wildfire mitigation plan. What I do know is that oftentimes cities and municipalities will have separate funds to underground strategically and use that money as they see fit. I've seen that in other jurisdictions in which I've worked. That's typically more for cosmetic purposes than for our safety and resiliency. The undergrounding that we've described in our plan is specifically going to be targeted for system resiliency and for safety related to our wildfire mitigation plan. So I think those are two separate programs that we're talking about.
Okay.
Do you have to spend the money in the year that you collected, or can you build it up and use it? Okay, so I think that's how I thought it worked. You can build that up over time and then use it as you see fit, as that fund aggregates and collects.
Okay, I've used up my time. I turn it over to my colleague Ryan.
Thanks, Mark. And I just want to note this is taking a lot longer than
Probably I'm
20 minutes,
answering
so
your questions.
it's totally fine, right? Like I think we can do this. I'm gonna ask the people who have already given asked their questions. Please start thinking about what your comments are going to be so that we can keep those really tight and try to get through this. Otherwise, we really will be here all night. Okay, Ryan, you are next.
Welcome, Mr. Kinney and team. Appreciate your work with the partnership over the years. I'd like to pick up on Mark's analogy, and in decarbonization, if electrification and what's happening there is the elephant in the room, I think the blue whale is what's going on in our with natural gas. And I'd like to ask you to just talk about how our ongoing investment, your ongoing investments in natural gas system work with respect to, is it just sort of generally a smooth continuous approach over the years versus are there big lumpy investments coming up? And then secondly, what are you doing to avoid stranded assets in this system as we collectively think about how to fully decarbonize our entire energy system?
All right, I'm going to take your advice and I'm going to try to be really pithy in my answer. So the investment is, and I think this is in a public investment deck, so I'm not saying anything that's private, but we're expecting to invest $500 million in our natural gas system, 25 to 29. That'll probably fluctuate up or down. I'd say 60%, 60 to 70% of that is what we call asset health and reliability. I like to think of it as maintenance and safety. Whether we retire our gas system tomorrow, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, those pipes are going to still be in the ground and we're going to have to maintain them for the purposes of safety. So a big chunk of that investment is safety. How are we avoiding that stranded asset risk? It's a tough question, and I'm not going to be able to answer it in 2 or 3 minutes because it's a difficult question. And I'm not actually sure it's the right thing for us to be focused on. That's probably a longer question, a longer dialogue as well. We're trying as we can, and we have dollars in the clean heat plan to help customers that want to electrify their homes do that. The point that I will make to you, and I've made it to the Public Utilities Commission, is that in the absence of somebody telling us I don't have to serve customers, we have customers that still want natural gas. We still have developers that are developing subdivisions that want natural gas for heating and cooking. And we can tell them the programs that we have available to electrify, and we're working to do that to promote more electrification. But there's no law that tells that customer that he can't install she can't install a natural gas stove, and we have an obligation to serve them. So one of the things that I think we're going to need to think about in terms of stranded asset risk is that as customers leave the gas system and go over to the electric system, who should they be able to avoid the costs of a gas system that was built to serve them? That's a question that we're going to have to ask ourselves, and so who should bear the costs as customers decide to move off the gas system, recognizing that we still have pipes in the ground that are going to need to be maintained. Until there are 0 customers on that system, there's a system that's going to have to be maintained. I hope that's helpful. It's a longer conversation than we probably have time for. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'll look forward to the deeper dive. And then just real briefly, if I could, I've had a number of community members ask me, they've said, gosh, my power went out the other day, then it came back on. Seems like it's happening more than it used to. Maybe people are jumpy, I don't know. But I think what I heard you say is the PSPS events are scheduled, they're noticed. So if people are experiencing...
No, I'm sorry. Not PSPS events. We've only had one PSPS event. There aren't any PSPS events. There was one PSPS event. I just want to be very clear because people keep thinking that we've had multiple PSPS events. We haven't. We have our system set on certain days when there's high winds. We'll have the settings in enhanced power line safety settings. That's EPSS. And so people might be experiencing more frequent outages because we've set our system to be more sensitive so that if something touches a line, it de-energizes and it stays de-energized. When there's no wildfire risk and under normal climate circumstances, things hit our lines, they may de-energize and they would re-energize automatically. We've prevented them from doing that because we want to avoid an ignition. So that might be what people are experiencing. We're actually using a different metric now. It's called CME4. It's customers experiencing multiple interruptions more than 4 times. And when we see locations that have experienced multiple interruptions 4 times or greater, we are adjusting the sensitivity yet again. And so we're trying to make sure that we're balancing public safety and reliability, and we're having to do that in a way that we just haven't historically. I feel like my answers are getting too long. I'm sorry. I'm trying.
Thank you. We're asking complicated questions too. Tara, you are up.
Hi there.
Hello.
First of all, don't fret. We all have PTSD from PSPS. That's a joke. But it's true that event in April was really difficult for everybody. So I guess my first question is, in terms of, you said 72, 48, and 24 hours, which is it? Or is it all of them?
It's all of them. So thank you. It's a great question. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that. So we will be giving communications at each of those lines of demarcation. So it's 72 hours. And again, the thing to remember is that weather's dynamic. And so what we see at 96 hours is not necessarily what we're going to see at 72, 48, and 24. So at 72 hours, our commitment is to tell our offices of emergency management and critical facility customers, here's what we're seeing. We're seeing weather that would tend to indicate that we might have to conduct a proactive de-energization 72 hours hence. We will update that again at 48 hours and say, here's the weather that we're seeing. And that's when we'll start to do customer communications as well and say, customers, here's what we're seeing. Please begin to make preparations in advance of a potential public safety power shutoff event. At 24 hours, we'll say again, the weather conditions are such that we fully expect that we're going to have to execute a public safety power shutoff. Please take care and make preparations for that. So at each of those different stages, we'll be providing different levels of specificity based upon weather that we're seeing and providing communications at each of those steps of the way. And that's all outlined it's a separate part of our wildfire mitigation plan. There's a PSPS playbook that outlines that.
So when you talked about you're going to tell your critical customers, I remember that was a Saturday night or a Friday night, whatever night it was the weekend. And businesses and restaurants and bars were just totally taken off guard. Are they included in who's included in your critical customers?
Yeah, I don't know explicitly all the different critical customers. These guys can fill in, but a restaurant's not. And when we say a critical customer, it's going to be like a hospital, water treatment plant, pharmacies. That's a critical customer. And I don't mean to be flippant, but I mean it's a business that's a restaurant. It's not providing life
No,
saving.
I get it. I
So they
understand.
would get 48 and 24 hours notice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that we don't have to deal with the thing that happened with the shutdown of the sewage plant, but we won't go into that right now. But I don't want to take people's time, so we can talk about this later, about how do we get people, the businesses whose one Saturday night wiped out is so critical to them staying in business. Like, how did they find out ahead of time? But we don't have to talk about that now, because what I'm going to ask you to think about is if you would have some sort of a subcommittee on customer service. No offense, but monopolies are and customer service, that's hard, because monopolies, it's not like the customer can go somewhere else. So I'll just talk about that later. I'll just do my second question now, if you don't mind. And that
I really
is,
want to respond to that.
what? Pardon me?
I think
I really
Sarah
want to respond to that, because it was the
Oh, okay.
implication that we don't care about customer service by virtue of being a natural monopoly.
Okay.
I maybe just want to disabuse people of the premise, because I think the fact that we're a natural monopoly doesn't mean that we don't care about our customers, and we do focus on customer service as if we were a competitive business, and I would ask, I beg grace that we not be judged by the April 6th and 7th wind event as illustrative of how we feel about our customers.
Okay, that's fair. All right. I know I'm feeling pressure from Nicole, so I'm going to quickly do my second question. Right, Nicole? So I guess my question is, in order to protect businesses and critical infrastructure during a power outage, could Boulder, or why couldn't they? Or are we allowed to create geographical zones that would be electricity self-sufficient, so that businesses / critical infrastructure could keep operating even if the grid power is lost? Now, I heard through the grapevine that we're not allowed to do that. And if not, then why not?
I think maybe there's maybe embedded in your question is the concept of, could we partner together to construct microgrids?
Yes, that is my question.
And I think that's something we've seen in other places. I think it's something that merits more discussion, because we have to think about how we pay for it, who pays for it. It's only serving a certain group of customers. That's not something that we would socialize across all our customer base in the way that we do traditional utility infrastructure. I think it's a conversation that merits more discussion, council member.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Lauren, and again, just want to remind people, start preparing your answers to those questions so we can get through those really quickly.
Thanks. So I heard something that sort of surprised me, which was that the standard that you use in terms of wind speed for your systems is a regionally based wind speed. And I just wanted to see, is that true? Because as an architect, I know we're in a special wind zone in Boulder, and we have to design for 165 mile an hour, 7-second gusts west of Broadway. Is that the same thing you guys are doing with your system?
Yeah, so we design our poles to withstand winds. So that's kind of like whether it's in Boulder or Denver or someplace else. When we have regional wind zones, it's because of the wind speed in Boulder, because of the topography. And again, I'm not an architect or a scientist, so I'm being a little colloquial here, but it's going to differ than it is in an urban population center. And so what I think is intended by what you just described is that when we use wind speed and relative humidity and fuel moisture and techno-silva modeling, it's all four of those that go into determining whether we're going to conduct a public safety power shutoff. For purposes of determining whether we're going to put our system in EPSS, it's wind speed and relative humidity and moisture on the ground as well. So the what is a
I was just wondering about the poles and lines, not the
how
power
the poles and
safety
lines are designed. Our poles and lines are designed to withstand wind speeds, and we use the uniform standard. There's not a Boulder pole or a Denver pole. So that's okay. Thanks for
even
clarifying.
though we're in a special wind region that has higher wind ratings than Denver does.
You have different wind determinations for purposes of determining whether we're going to have EPSS or WSO or conduct a proactive de-energization. But that's not the same as, we don't design our poles differently for different regions.
Okay. I live in Shanahan Ridge, where most of our poles or most of our lines are undergrounded already, but we experience a significant number of power outages, some recently during a council meeting. And I'm just wondering why that is, that when my lines are undergrounded here, I'm still experiencing fairly high levels of unreliability, and how are you making sure that that doesn't happen as we underground more areas and making sure that those are providing a higher level of reliability?
So I'd probably need to get back to you to understand specifically your location and why you're experiencing more outages. I can't answer it. I just don't know the answer. And we'd need to, I'd love to get your service address. We can do it later so that not everybody on the call knows your home address. And then we can figure out if there's something specific at that location. I'll say as a general proposition, we can see outages even where there's undergrounding, because your lines may be undergrounded, but they may be fed by lines that are overhead someplace else. And so the way our system is constructed, you might still experience faults because of even where it's undergrounded. The other thing I'll say, you have underground infrastructure, it's human equipment. It's still subject to failure. So even if it's undergrounded, it might fail for other reasons.
Thank you. And then my final question is just around mapping. After the PSPS, one of my main requests was around making publicly available maps, of course, with critical infrastructure information redacted, available to the community so that we can better understand and communicate around areas that what's going to be shut off, turned back on, both for future power shutoffs, but also for other outage events. Where are you guys with that? And when can we expect something like that?
So I'd say our plan is, in the moment, is to be able to have more accurate outage maps that show where the outages are taking place in the moment. We can't develop a PSPS map per se, because we won't know until we're about to conduct a PSPS event what the polygon is. But in the polygon, meaning what's the shape around the area that we intend to de-energize, that's going to necessarily be different with every single event. So we're actually managing a PSPS event in another part of our service territory now, and we have polygon maps that we're able to share with the public that says, based upon what we're seeing today, here's the area that we would expect to be impacted by a PSPS. So let's hope that we're not going to need a PSPS, but should we have to execute a PSPS event, I think we'll have maps that will be able to illustrate the perimeter and the polygon of the potential event.
Thank you. Hopefully that will be because I've seen those with fairly low levels of resolution and accuracy. So hopefully we're stepping it up there. That's all I have for questions.
Thank you, Lauren. Aaron, you're up next.
Great, thanks. I just got a couple of quick questions for Excel. Hopefully we can have quick answers as well, so we can move on. Thanks so much for being with us here tonight. The first one is about interconnections for solar systems. I've heard from installers and some customers that can take quite a while sometimes. And in fact, I believe our Boulder Modular Home Factory is waiting for an interconnection right now. What does that delay result from? Is there potential to make progress on those delays?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, with all candid, I can't answer the question without knowing more specifics, because every single one of those delays will have a very different cause. We had some issues with our process probably 2 summers ago, where we had a backlog. There was an extension in one of the tax credit programs resulted in an influx of applications, and we had a backlog. And we redesigned our end-to-end process. Some of the common causes have been applications that were filled out incorrectly. There were miscommunications between developers and the customer, miscommunications between the customer and us, miscommunication between the developer and us. So there's any number of reasons why there might be delays in interconnection. So there's no single reason that I can give you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Maybe we'll follow up on the specifics of our particular project.
Thank you. I will commit to getting back with you once we know those details.
Appreciate that. And then my one other one relates to the coal ash cleanup at the Valmont power plant. I know you got some information over to us in response to Councilmember Schuhard's questions. But the one thing I wanted to follow up on that specifically around that is about air quality monitoring. Just wondering what the specific plans are for monitoring any changes to air quality as that project is carried out.
Maybe I will ask you guys. I don't know if we're doing air quality monitoring.
We'll have to follow up.
We'll have to follow up on that. I know that we've got a partnership with the company that's helping us do the cleanup. I know that we contain the coal ash and have a way to beneficially reuse it, and we contain it as it's being transported to be mixed into concrete. I'm not sure that we are doing air quality monitoring, but we'll have to follow up on that.
If you could get back to us, of course, interest to for our Boulder County neighbors, but also the winds blow back towards Boulder as well. So certainly interest to our residents also. That's what I got. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron and Taisha. And then I've got just a couple questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'll save my comments and go to my 3 quick questions. The first is around climate resilience. And so it's been really wonderful to hear all of the incredible efforts, which I'll give kudos to more specifically during the comment section. But one of the areas I didn't hear or read very much about is habitat and wildlife. I noticed neither habitat nor wildlife mentioned in the memo. Can you speak to Xcel Energy's efforts? Please note that I am aware of the Nature Conservancy and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife study on sensitive areas for habitat and wildlife to inform energy siting with the Energy Office, but I'm in this moment interested and curious to know what current efforts are being done beyond planting native grasses to accelerate biodiversity in light of disturbances from infrastructure and transition lines.
Well, thanks for the question, Councilmember Adams. And we comply with all the state and federal laws, and there are lots of them, particularly around endangered species like the lesser prairie chicken. This comes up a lot when we build transmission lines, which traverse BLM lands, Forest Service lands. And so we're subject to quite a bit of regulation with respect to not building a transmission line in the first place in an area where there is an endangered species. So that's probably point one. We try to make sure that we restore areas back to what they were before we began our construction and our infrastructure. I think I might have to just beg your grace that we go back and talk to some of our sustainability folks to be more specific about other things that we're doing.
I appreciate that. And that's actually one of, I'll have more questions in my comments of things I'd like to see when we get to the priority section. So I appreciate that. I'll go ahead and move on to my second question. It's around just transition. And I appreciate the focus areas on transitioning away from gas, both natural gas and coal to renewable, but wanted to ask a little bit more deeply about the equity considerations and was curious how Xcel is monitoring and tracking the cumulative effects of those who have been disproportionately impacted, both because we in the city of Boulder use, obviously energy generated here within our community, but the majority of the energy that we use comes from other areas. So again, just curious to get a deeper and I will have additional comments on things I know I would like to see as we move forward in the priority section, but I just wanted to hold space to hear a little bit more than the half-page paragraph around the cumulative impact studies. Thank you.
So we have, and one of the interesting things when I got here was to learn how many different definitions we have for various impacted communities. So we have disproportionately impacted communities, which means something different than income qualified communities, and we have low and moderate income customers. And so I've been something that I've personally leaned into is making sure that the programs that we offer, I'll just give you an example. We have community solar gardens, and we build these community solar gardens, and the intention is to allow those that aren't otherwise able to install solar rooftop or to otherwise deploy renewable energy to be able to have renewable energy delivered to them, and they can subscribe to these. We offer particular discounts for those programs, and we're in the process of designing a program now that will go into our next renewable energy plan. And it does have specific benefits for both disproportionately impacted communities as well as income qualified communities. And I'm happy to share more details with our res plan and other programs that we have that are specifically designed for DI and IQ communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I certainly look forward to hearing more. And I absolutely hear you on how many different definitions they are. I'm especially challenged by the use of frontline community, both those who are close to the wildlife interface, but it's also the same word used to address and those communities that are living next to or are polluted by energy generation and transition. So again, looking forward to getting more clarity and community common definitions around some of these terms. This is my last question, and it is around the clean heat beneficial electrification. Very excited to hear about the replacing of fossil fuel use with electricity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy costs, particularly in heating, cooling, and cooking. As you know, we are in the midst of conversations again to ensure that we can have strong local restaurants. And I think there are more levers that our community and our council can use to ensure a robust environment. And one of them is that clean heat beneficial electrification. And so curious to know how much of these investments do you expect coming to Boulder?
So I will say a significant part of the Clean Heat Plan funding, some of it is to provide rebates for those customers that want to switch from gas to electric. And so it's going to really depend upon where the customers are that are taking advantage of the programs. So it's not specifically necessarily saying that some percentage of that 441 million is earmarked for Boulder. It's going to be, we're actually in the process now. We have a customer programs office that actually is designing how they're going out and so letting people know that these programs are available and receiving the applications. So maybe we can take an action to find out if we've started that outreach to Boulder or not.
Well, I certainly appreciate it as we consider this marriage, if you will, and if we want to go back to dating, right? These are the opportunities and these are the differentiators. So again, thank you for your feedback and the work that I look forward to the work we have ahead and the opportunity to give comments as well. But thank you very much for these 3 questions that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have a couple questions myself. The first one's for Excel, second one is for staff or possibly one of the advisory committee members. The Excel question is the virtual power plant funding already in hand, or is that something that's potentially at risk with federal funding cuts? And again, just quick answer, I'm not trying to go deep here.
I think the DOE funding for that is safe. We've already started working with the DOE to get those funds, I think actually last year before the inauguration. So okay. I think that's in hand.
Thank you.
It's not in hand, it's safe.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And then Jonathan, I think this one may be for your team or maybe the advisory committee. How are we defining energy being produced close to where it's used? Because that was kind of one of the things we were trying to aim for in the memo. Boulder's clean energy is produced close to where it's used by 2050. That about half of it would be. I was just wondering how we're defining that.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Council Member. Happy to jump in here and would invite both Carolyn and any of our advisory panel members to jump in here too. So I think what you're referring to is our target to achieve a certain amount of renewable electricity generated in city limits, since the way we describe that is it's owned or installed. And we talk about installed capacity. So what we know is the nameplate rating of all of the systems that are permitted and that are installed inside city limits. And so that's how we define what is local. So the one caveat to that is that we do include our hydroelectric power that's generated from the hydro facilities that the city own and operate. So it was important to talk about it in installed capacity, so we weren't getting into a little bit of I would say, attention around, well, who owns the renewable energy credits? Or is it Xcel? Is it the city? Is it the customer? It was really just about the installed capacity locally. And I'm really delighted to say that the first target that we had for, and I'm going to look to Carolyn to remind me if I get this wrong, that we had a target, a 2030 target that we actually met 2 years ago. So we've been incredibly effective in this space of encouraging residents and businesses to install solar on rooftops and in rights of ways and community solar. So we continue to move in that space. It's a critically important piece of our program because we know that we believe anyway that energy that is generated close to where it's being used is more resilient. We avoid those long transmission of energy problems that we might incur. And so really trying to connect the generation to where it's being used, and then potentially adding storage in that system as well. So Carolyn, did I get anything wrong there?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jonathan. And you know, the number as of the end of last year, or actually even it might have actually been the year before, was 105 megawatts towards our 100 megawatt goal. I think the one thing I would add, and I think this gets to Councilmember Folkert's question of Xcel a little bit while ago, having the generation alone, it really isn't sufficient for the resiliency goals. And so our advisory panel has really flagged, you know, this need to think about how we, you know, become a bunch of virtual power plants, meaning create more enhanced resiliency. And I see this as a priority work plan within the city's work plan for this coming few years, is really to reimagine that local generation goal to more encompass solar and the resiliency aspects of that. So we're looking forward to kicking that conversation off this year.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate the response. Okay, so we're done with the clarifying questions. Took twice as long as I thought it might, but hopefully it's been informative for everyone. How we're going to move through the rest of this conversation. We've got about 30 minutes for us to answer staff's questions. And what I'm going to ask folks to do is to combine their responses to both questions. Everybody will have about 3-ish minutes to answer those questions. And what I'm hoping is that this can be a time for us to talk to staff and answer those questions with Mr. Kinney, with you all at Xcel listening to us. So I'm going to ask you all to listen to this conversation, and then I'll give you some time at the end, about 5 or 10 minutes, to share back what you heard, any reactions that you have to the things that we have said, and just share your thoughts before we wrap up. So I will take hands as they come up, but I'm thinking everybody is going to want to have a chance to say some words here. So Mark, it looks like you got in there first. So
well, can we put the question? Can we put the questions back up on the screen?
Yeah, and I can I'll read them aloud too, just for if anybody can't see it. What areas of
We also put them in the chat.
Yeah. So here. What areas of focus would you like to see receive greater priority for the next 5 years? And is there any additional information or analysis that council needs from staff or Xcel to inform our decisions about continuing the franchise?
Okay.
So Mark, would you like to
yes,
kick us off?
Yes, I will kick us off again. For me, the priority has to be wildfire resilience. That is my priority 1, 2, and 3. Having seen what the Marshall Fire did, you know, we are a burning ember away from having the same experience here. And to the extent that fires can be caused by anything related to our energy utility, we need to be addressing that with great attention. I can't emphasize it too much. And I would like to have a clear listing of the projects that Xcel wishes to undertake in the near future on that subject, and then we can have further conversation later amongst ourselves and with Xcel as to whether that scope is satisfactory or we need more. But the short answer is we will probably always need more. The other area of concern for me is still the PSPS. And I just have a couple of comments with respect to that. You give notice to critical facilities and institutions. I want to go back to something that Tara was saying. You know, restaurants can go out of business and people can lose their livelihoods as a result of a shutdown, loss of inventory, and 3 days without service. Okay. Giving notice at this point is the flick of a switch, electrons moving through the system and email. We should be much more expansive in the people we notify that an event like this is coming. And it's got to be King Super, it's got to be Safeway, and it's got to be restaurants, people who can lose everything because you've decided to turn the power off. And nobody objects to your doing so. It's a safety issue and we all understand that, but people need notice. And lastly, I simply urge you again to review your processes for turning power back on. It's not satisfactory that to deal with a 2-hour high wind incident that people can be without power for 3 days. That's just not good enough. And for me, if you want to continue this kind of a relationship, you've got to do better on that. You really do. And I understand you need to examine the lines, get more people to examine the lines. It's just not a reasonable response to say, well, it takes a long time. We've got to get people out there. There are people who are cold and hungry and losing their business and losing their food supplies. It's not good enough to say that 3 days is okay. And in terms of additional information that I need with respect to the decision to go or no go with Excel, I've been relatively impressed with what I've heard today, with a couple of exceptions. I don't think I require more information because I've gotten quite a lot from staff, and to the extent that it's accurate, and I assume it is, it's given me a lot of material to think through. I don't know that I need a whole lot more, other than some greater assurance as to how you're going to meet your 27 and 30 goals. That I was here when this franchise agreement was negotiated, and it was a sensitive and contentious issue. You can't have 4 goals and not meet them. Okay, this was the heart of our understanding. So you need to give the community better assurance that in 27 and 30, we are going to meet the goals that you guys agreed to. And I think that's critical in my thought process as to how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Tina, you are next.
Yeah, and thank you, Mark, for saying a lot of the things. I'm interested in also reiterating, especially about wildfire mitigation and prevention, as well as meeting our goals that we all agreed to when we did this. I wasn't here when that agreement was made, but I agree. I appreciate the way you spoke about that. I am also interested in just understanding, as my question indicated, sort of the outlook on how people benefit from a cost perspective of the investments that they make in energy from what they pay in utilities, and making sure that the people in Boulder who and our town as a whole reap some of the rewards. One of the most common thing that we are shown is how much the stock price of Excel is rising, and yet we sometimes don't know if there's a connection with how our community is benefiting. So if that could be made more clear, and you addressed the question really well, and to keep letting us understand how we're benefiting, when I think many of us still regret that we didn't become our own provider of electricity. So the other piece is just if there's a way to have transparency around the air and water quality monitoring around the coal plant, that would be terrific, so that community members can access that information on their own when they want, and be assured that those activities are happening consistently. So that would be really helpful, I think, for the community. whether to stay in this relationship. I think I asked staff when about how they felt about the relationship, and it felt to me that it's worth continuing, but to really make sure that we're benefiting from it consistently. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Tina. Lauren, you're next.
Thanks. For the Excel team, there are several areas where I would like to see improvement. The first is that we have something like 21 city programs and initiatives that are dependent upon engagement with Excel at some level. And I really would like to see those moving forward smoothly. And for that, I think we need more communication in terms of detailed promises and timelines to enable that work to be efficient. Second, there needs to be an increased focus on improving reliability and safety for our community members and businesses. When I look back at some of the records of fires, it seems like there's been Excel infrastructure responsible for a fire almost every 5 years or so in our community. And as we see an increase in red flag warning, it's only a matter of time before one of these fires becomes a catastrophic event. Additionally, as our poles and lines, I really feel like should be designed to our unique and higher wind speeds. We also need better communication related to systems shut down for any reason. And finally, I would like to see Excel go above and beyond during the fly ash contamination remediation in terms of monitoring, so that the community can easily find up-to-date data and feel confident that they are not being put at risk during this process. From staff, I would like to know what options are available to us if we decide to leave the partnership in the next year or two. I personally expect Excel to be an exceptional partner with us. And for that, our community needs them to meet their commitments, communicate proactively, and be creative in thinking about how they meet our community's shifting needs. To me and many of our community members, I don't think we're currently meeting that mark. And while I'm hopeful that that will change, I also think we need to be prepared in case it does not. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Ryan, you are up. Oh, sorry, Tina, you're.
Oh.
That's an old hand. Okay. Yes, Ryan.
Oh, okay. The overall thesis, I think, for me, is that Boulder is a community that wants to be very sophisticated about climate solutions. And if somebody were thinking about this from a blank slate, they would conclude that our energy provider is probably the most important, or one of the top few most important partners in getting deep decarbonization, deep resilience, and a better future right. So what I expect in sum is that we are doing things together that are really confronting big structural challenges that include challenges that are established through current legislation and other structural issues. So I'm going to say 4 things in particular, and I'm braiding partly what I've already heard. So the first is wildfire management. Clearly, this is an existential concern for our community. It is complicated, though, because there is a tension between making us safe and also preserving the reliable energy utility that people have come to expect. And so I think the outcome is that Excel internalizes how to provide both of those to get it right, to do it in a way that provides an accessible, streamlined, positive experience for community members that are trying to learn about and prepare for the disruptions. And beyond that, I would like Excel to, sort of just make it happen. Second one is related, and it's that we seem to be specifically in need of developing a network of resilience centers or hubs and or microgrids, the kinds of things that give us large scale battery storage and other amenities that we can use in times of disaster and trouble. This is this is an emerging area. I understand there's quite a bit of good practice that's understood with how to do that here in town. I think part of that is going to need to involve finding ways to come together to allow for competition in our distribution system. I recognize that as an investor-owned utility with the monopoly that's been granted, it is not conventional to lean into that. But I also think that the auspices here we should be giving this is that we need all of the tools we can possibly have in the community to imagine a better future. So I look forward to that. The third is on beneficial electrification. Renewables and electrification are inherently more affordable technologies, and they give us the tools to manage energy even further more affordably. So I would like to see quantitatively, concretely, how our residents are benefiting from those. We can see this in some of the slides that show money going to investors. We can see concretely, quantitatively, those benefits. I would like us and our members to be able to see that in some way that makes it really concrete and clear. And then finally, we need a plan to transition from natural gas to electrification on the supply side. The decarbonization is happening in electrification, but the natural gas system is problematic. It stands in the way of our further widespread electrification. It's carbon intense and it's leaky. And it doesn't work to incrementally reduce the system because the system relies on economies of scales. So we need a plan, and we need a plan with Xcel. That's it, but I want to just do one final thing on the coal ash situation in Valmont. I'm extremely concerned about this. I don't think we have the air quality regulations that we need in place. It's not clear to me that we are protected. And we don't have time to go into detail, but I want to just endorse that we need to get something together for that. And we have some questions offline that I know we'd like to ask you to take. So I'll just conclude. What does it take for the second question? I would look for Xcel to be being a good partner in the things I've just mentioned, and especially the one on natural gas. And if we can't get to that place, I think we should be talking about what would it take for the city to take control of that natural gas system and to do it ourselves, or at least to be exploring that. Thank you all and everybody for all the great work.
Thank you, Ryan. Taisha, you are next.
Thank you so much. So I echo, though I echo my colleagues' interest around the wildfire resilience, especially the targeted undergrounding. I do not see that as the sole priority. And if anything, I would love to see an incredible acceleration around our renewable work, and specifically in the areas of siting for habitat and wildlife, which I've already referenced the Colorado Energy Office's efforts, post-solar installation activation by Xcel to ensure predictability. We have some folks waiting 7 months for activation. So we go through all this installation, which is already a 3 to 6 month experience, and then to have this additional time. So really want to accelerate that. Third on this list is storage and storage considerations, inclusive of security and microgrid planning for developing goals around storage and microgrids, the resilience centers, as my colleague Ryan mentioned, and others, community controlled virtual power plants. I know we have a pilot going on, and that's wonderful. And just in general, mono anything is death. So our community cannot solely rely on Xcel's big grid alone. Throughout additional considerations that I would love to see amplified next time, the entire equity section for every single one of those needs to, I look forward to having some deeper components around. Again, this is not charity. This is a debt owed. And our city is known, we are not generating all of the energy that we use in our city, and we are responsible for the health and planetary impacts of that. So within the equity considerations, I would love to hear more around the following: direct compensation and assistance that could look like bill credits and debt forgiveness, health considerations for pollution-related health issues like asthma and respiratory conditions, paid through some kind of historic profit margins, perhaps, to infrastructure and services. So again, we talked about the targeted grid modernization. Again, this is where we need to balance the efforts around undergrounding, which tends to happen closer to the wildlife interface, which is where more wealthy people live, versus targeted grid modernization, which is not being considered or prioritized. next. The third equity consideration is around environmental remediation. And so many have discussed the coal ash. I would love to specifically lift up air quality monitoring and reduction, especially now that the county has reduced funding for air quality monitoring due to the extensive federal cuts and other competing priorities. The fourth equity consideration is around equitable energy transition. So again, escalating our community solar and microgrids, and of course, stronger environmental justice regulations, perhaps local mandates requiring Excel to assess and mitigate disproportionate impacts on marginalized communities. And so that is the equity consideration, and I know I'm still within my 3 minutes. I have a few more areas I'd love in the next sections, and that's around off-ramp, the 2025 off-ramp from Xcel Energy. So as council does not have to make any decisions at this moment, I think it's absolutely critical that we have as much information as possible, and I know our community wants to know that as well. Natural gas transition, and to let us make sure that we are transitioning natural gas away from renewables, but all renewables are not the same. So when we're generating that energy, that it is, to my colleague Ryan's thing, no carbon on that. And again, I just want to lift up nuclear here. I commend Xcel Energy and their efforts in Pueblo, but I have significant concerns around what I'm hearing of a transition to nuclear, which we know is water intensive as well as mineral intensive. So we'd love to just make sure that we are doing everything we can in that transition to differentiate when we are, and make sure that we are being specific around renewable energy with renewable batteries and those kinds of things. I welcome hearing more about the pilots and research as well, particularly those that have not started around the Second Life battery storage and the Solar Tech Accelerator Center. And for staff, one document that will be absolutely critical is the fiscal note moving forward. We must have all financial information about this partnership in an Excel document that can be easily toggled with multiple years of data, as opposed to having to toggle between hundreds of Word documents, making it very difficult to ensure the fiscal consideration, especially since we're fiscally constrained, and we were fiscally constrained last year. I can only imagine what it's going to look like moving forward. And then lastly, council communication. I have reached out to your local and state Excel liaisons without response. This was not the type of partnership that I had hoped following such excellent ongoing communication and updates under the previous liaison, Effie. Since the transition to the new representatives, I have not been able to get that continued effort of support. And so as we move forward, I am hopeful that we can hear from you more than once a year, and our community members as well. I hope we can build on the incredible successes of the targeted undergrounding and public engagement and EVs, but we must always be careful of greenwashing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taisha. Aaron, you're up next.
Great. Well, my colleagues have made a number of really fantastic comments, so I will not reiterate all of those. Just a brief note that in terms of the partnership, I continue to look for tangible results that make a difference for energy use in our community and reduce emissions. So excited about the virtual power plant. We'll see how that goes. And also the +1 on the air monitoring for the coal ash project. So look forward to that. On in terms of the franchise, I guess in order for me to make a final decision on that question, I just need to see a really thorough kind of cost benefit analysis. Like if we were to leave the franchise, what benefits would that bring to our community? Because I would need to see that. For us to consider that, I would need to see a compelling case for what the benefits would be if we pulled out of the franchise. So the one other thing I'll do is I'll turn to Wayne and George from our advisory panel and ask them if they have any particular items they'd like to see highlighted in the partnership work going forward. Wayne and George, any thoughts there?
Sure, this is Wayne. Something we've been discussing in our panel meetings is creating some kind of a dashboard that is the single source of truth that the council, Excel, and the advisory panel all agreed to be true, that says what is the status of all the projects leading to the 2030 goal. Personally, I'm most concerned about how we're going to meet the 100% renewables. The last time Excel presented to council, we were pretty excited about the the federal funding that was going to be available to do those projects, but we only have 5 years, and where are we? And are we going to make it? And is it even possible? So it's an accountability exercise that we all agree upon. And I know there's lots of projects in place, and we can earmark some of that energy to Boulder or not with a spreadsheet. But we'd like really to see the new capacity that was added to get us from our ongoing consumption to 100% renewable. That's all I got. George.
And I'd like to jump in here if you don't mind, Nicole. I'd like to see this be a cooperative agreement. We could talk about it as a partnership. I think that both sides of this have to contribute. I don't think that we can, as a city, we can demand things. I don't think as Excel, we can demand things. Like any cooperative agreement, like any partnership, we both have to give and take. And I think that Excel is making some efforts to meet our goals. I think that our goals are very high, and that's not wrong, but I'd like to see us jump into this as an agreement that we want to make work, as opposed to being very selfish about it. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, Wayne and George, thanks so much for speaking up. I appreciate that. And Nicole, that's all I got. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Erin. Terry, you're up.
Okay, great. I also don't want to repeat all the great things everybody said, but I do want to go back to the monopoly issue just for a second, because it's not your guys' fault that you're a monopoly. I mean, monopolies are not made to please the customer. I have a successful business and I have a lot of happy customers, but that's because I know that if I'm not good to them, they could go somewhere else. And so for you to have great customer service is just harder. It's the human condition doesn't want to do that. So what I would like to see, and I'm going to go back to what Mark said and then what I said and others, that how are we going to add the businesses to your list and consumers to your list of critical? I realize it's a different definition of critical, by the way. Of course, it's not critical infrastructure, but it's critical to people that you have the kind of customer service that we all expect in our lives, even if you are a monopoly, because I know that's important to you. You said it was. So how can we be assured that this is going to happen? Just by you saying it's going to happen to me isn't quite good enough, because we do still remember what happened last April. We're going to give up. I will give you grace for that, but then how do we know it's going to change in the future? And what can you do, think about, that could prove that you are thinking about the critical infrastructure, the businesses, the homeowners? And so that brings me to my second point is I think that microgrids and local storage are a win-win because even though you might look at it as like, well, we don't want to give up any control, there's not a world where the way the grid is now is going to ever be okay during climate, our winds and our climate and different weather. I'm losing my voice, my thoughts, but weather incidences, there's not a world. So it can only help you if we have options once the grid does go down. So I guess I would like, monopolies don't often think outside of the box, but if it's a partnership, then you would say to yourself, goodness, we can't have this happen again. And we know we can't meet all the needs of Boulder. And we sometimes are going to have, the grid is sometimes going to go down. So why don't we let creative thinking come forth? And how can we include the local storage and the grids that some of us were talking about earlier? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's good for you and it's good for us. To me, that's the kind of partnership that I like and that monopolies have always failed to do, but I will not give up hope that you will do it. Which brings to the last, I think I agree with my colleagues that we don't have a lot of options. So unless we keep our is that the word off board? No, what is the word? Off
ramp.
Thanks. Unless we keep that off ramp, we have no way to, not fight back, but push you to do better. So I do want to look into the possibilities of what can be in the future. It's something like what Ryan said. in terms of off-ramps. And I'd like to be let's just say that in my past life, I was not a supporter of the muni, but now with some of the experience that we've had, I'm trying not to second guess myself, but I need a reason why to think that you are as good a partner as your PowerPoint suggests that you are. And also, I appreciate you all.
You good, Tara?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to offer my thoughts then, and then Mr. Kinney, I'll give you and your team a chance to respond. So for me, for areas of focus, as we consider next steps, I am interested in three main areas: partnership, resilience, and assistance. As George was saying, I would like to see commitments that reflect a real partnership. I'd like to the way we work together to be an area of focus for us. And this means that none of us, as either the city or Excel, is moving forward without the other on big plans and decisions, but rather in partnership as people who jointly care about our community's well-being. Mr. Kinney, you've heard a lot tonight from us about the PSPS, because we're all really still struggling with that as an example of what a partnership is not. The city and community were left behind in many aspects of the planning and response. And I know it was for safety, but that kind of thing where something big happens like that without including us, it can't happen again for a partnership. I know we're a relatively small city in the context of all the customers that you serve, but we're really innovative and we're climate leaders, and other communities look to us for examples of how to be innovative. So our inclusion as partners is really valuable to you all as well. I'd really like to see a greater focus on resilience, and specifically enabling microgrids that might even allow us to still have power when the grid goes down during the next PSPS. For example, my house has a PV system on the roof. We were producing power, but we couldn't use it because it was going to the grid. Something that would create resilience would be something that gives us an option to switch over, so that during a PSPS or some kind of event like that, we can still use the power that we're producing. My home could be a hub for my neighbors in an emergency, a place where people could stay warm, where we could preserve and cook food and have access to power, even during a more prolonged emergency. And who knows what we're going to be facing in the coming decades with the climate crisis. But it's these kinds of things that I see us thinking about how can we partner together to keep us safe, no matter what's going on with the larger grid. And I'd like to see us set some clear targets for growing energy assistance programs in alignment with what people are being charged and what shareholders are receiving. So if profits increase, for example, especially as households like mine are generating more of their power from renewable energy, then a percentage of those profits could be returned to the community in the form of energy assistance. I don't mind your profiting off of the power that my home produces, but I especially don't mind it if I know that some of those profits are coming back into my community. And as far as what I would like to see to inform an affirmative decision to continue, I want to see us get a little bit more specific with our goals for our partnership, and just really thinking about goals that are SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. And I really appreciate Wayne's suggestion to make them transparent and accessible to the community in some way. I want to see those goals specify the role of the city and of Excel and the consequences of not meeting those goals. Those consequences should also be really specific and things that both sides are willing to keep to. I want to see an agreement for how we're going to work together, what defines a partnership for each of us, and what we're committing to in terms of communication and collaboration as new things come up. And I can't speak for my colleagues, I'm just speaking for myself, but I would be willing to consider adjusting some of the off-ramp check-ins if we could get to these levels of clarity and transparency and accountability in what it means to be partners, what we're prioritizing together, and what happens when one of us isn't able to meet our commitments to the partnership. So with that kind of closes our comment section. I just want to open the floor to you all at Excel and see if you have any comments you would like to share back to us, given what you've heard.
Well, I thank you all for the very thoughtful comments, and I've taken copious notes, and I'm going to try to address each of the comments in turn, if I may, and I'll do the best I can. And I know, Councilmember Wallach, we started, and I heard you talk about resiliency, wildfire resiliency. I think you want a clear listing of Boulder specific projects. I think that's something we can commit to do. I will say your second comment on critical facilities and institutions and how we define that. I want to be clear that a critical facility for purposes of our PSPS and the offices of emergency management that get 72 hours notice, that doesn't mean that we're not going to also communicate with our customers writ large at the 48 and 24-hour marks. I don't want it to be the case that we're not communicating with all of our customers, but we are saying that at 72 hours, we want to be in close concert with our offices of emergency management and those facilities that are critical and essential for human existence. We will then, at the 48-hour and 24-hour mark, is when we do the broader communication to all impacted customers. A process for turning the power back on in that 3 days is not okay. I agree with you. I never said it was. And so I just want to be clear about that. We want to make sure that we get the power restored as quickly and as safely as possible. If there is a windstorm and there's a wire on the ground and we were to re-energize that without having looked at it, we would have created the very risk we were looking to mitigate. But pre-positioning crews, hiring more contractors in the event of a storm, that is something that we absolutely will and plan to do. Commissioner Marquise, you talked about wildfire prevention and
Mr. Kinney, I just wanted to note, so we do have one more big item that we need to get through tonight that's going to take us a while. You don't need to respond to every single one of our comments. I think you're welcome to email us those kinds of things, but just any kind of larger
maybe I can amalgamate and summarize. Let me just maybe amalgamate and summarize. I'll just say a couple things. We share a lot of the same goals. You know, we want to work cooperatively. We want to work in partnership with all of our customers, with all of the cities with which we work. We share decarbonization goals. We want to make sure we're mitigating wildfire risk to the greatest extent possible. We want to make sure that we're also serving as a partner on innovative things. You know, whether it is we have a history of innovation. We work with NREL. We work with our national labs. I will just very quickly say two things. I always like to say we're a natural monopoly because the natural component of it is important. As a matter of economics, it's more economically efficient to have one person, one entity stringing distribution wires than having a bunch of people do it, and it's capital intensive. So that's where the natural monopoly component comes from. That's separate and distinct from our commitment to our customers. And so by virtue of the fact that we're a natural monopoly does not render us indifferent to our customers. They're disconnected. So we care about our customers. And so I just want to be very clear about that. We're going to work with you guys on natural gas to electricity conversion. We share that. The natural gas system will not be eliminated anytime soon. And while we continue to have a natural gas system, we do need to maintain it through safety. We share the commitment to tangible results. The monitoring for coal ash remediation, I did hear that. We are monitoring groundwater because that's where the risk lies from an environmental perspective. I will have to get back to you on whether we are monitoring for air. I know that my colleague Nick is committed to communicating with all of the council people and everybody in Boulder. And so if there's been some miscommunication, then we'll have to work on that. But I'm very confident in Nick's abilities and his succession of Iffy Jennings. I'll say something very briefly and I'll stop. Throughout this process, we've worked with your partners, with Jonathan, with Nuria, with Caroline. We want to continue to serve you, and we think that this is what we do, and we're experts at it. And I don't want to criticize the municipal model or the rural electrical cooperative model. Those are models that work. But there's a reason that 75 to 80% of the United States is served by investor-owned utilities. And it's because we do it well. We do it safely, reliably, efficiently, and we do it at the lowest cost because we have big balance sheets. And so you should explore those other models to the extent that you see fit to do that. But we're very confident in our ability to be an excellent service provider to the city and county of Boulder, as well as to all the other communities we serve. So with that, we will, I'll amalgamate my notes and we'll look to get them over to you guys via email. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you so much. Jonathan and Carolyn, just a thumbs up if you have gotten what you need from us from the questions you asked.
Yes, thank you so much, Council Member. I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate the conversation that we've had tonight, and I really want to appreciate our colleagues from Excel. I'm going to try very hard to not let it hurt my feelings that Council had so few questions for staff, but I'm also so grateful that you've had this time with Robert and his team. I would say we've heard a great list from Council. And our advisory panel members. Our staff team remains 100% committed to integrating the desires of Council and to making this partnership as effective as it possibly can be. We'll loop back up and figure out how to get the information that Robert is going to provide back to Council. And I heard a lot of desire for future conversations on particular topics. And so we'll go to work on figuring out the best way to do that. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, colleagues, for wrapping this up in time. Thank you, staff, and thank you, George and Wayne, for joining us. And of course, thank you, Robert, Andrew, and Nick for being with us tonight. I look forward to hearing more about next steps, but really appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks all.
All right, well, our next item then is to talk about process improvements. We have 75 minutes for that discussion if we want to finish on time. And Nuria, I will hand it back over to you to launch us.
Thank you so much, Council Member. And I won't keep us long other than just to thank you so much to yourself, to Councilmember Marquis, to Councilmember Weiner, and to Councilmember Adams for your help as we were working through this council priority. And with that, I will pass it on to Assistant City Manager Pam Davis, who has so ably walked us through and championed this priority. Pam?
And I'm so sorry to interrupt. I realized that I forgot to explain how I was going to facilitate this part of the conversation. So I'm going to do that and then Pam.
Sounds good.
So staff basically has 6 items for us to discuss, and we're going to go through those one at a time. After staff presents each item, I'll take some clarifying questions, and then I will do a straw poll, the general question from staff. If a majority are interested, we'll have a little bit of time to share some high-level suggestions or questions that we'd like to have staff answer before it comes back to us. We don't have time tonight to hammer out the details of every process change we want to do. So I just want to be very clear about that. As noted in the memo, those details will come at another time. Tonight, we're really just focused on which ones are we interested in moving forward as a body. And if a majority is not interested in process change in any one of those 6 items, I'll provide some time for folks to add any comments or questions. Does anybody have any clarifying questions on how we're going to get through this in 75 minutes? Okay. Great. Then I will hand it over to you, Pam. Thank you so much for letting me interrupt there.
Thank you, Councilmember Spear, and good evening, Council. Since our topic tonight is process improvement, I will aim for 73 minutes total. My name is Pam Davis, and I use she, her pronouns, and I serve the community as Assistant City Manager. And I believe that Emily is graciously pulling up our slide deck. And if you could just go to slide 2, Emily, that'd be great. Tonight, I have the opportunity to present the update regarding work to date of your City Council Process Working Group, and as Councilmember Spear mentioned, bring forward 6 potential improvements for your discussion and consideration. You can see those here on the screen. Next slide. Very brief background. One of the 2024 to 2025 City Council priorities was to form a process working group to assess and refer a variety of council procedure improvement ideas. Following the spring 2024 retreat, council did appoint working group members, council members Adams, Marquis, Spear, and Weiner. This group solicited process ideas from all of council and received 36 in total to discuss and prioritize. Ultimately, they determined a list of 15 process improvement priorities for staff and council consideration and potential implementation. 9 of these items are fairly easy to understand and operational in nature and are already moving forward to be further developed by relevant staff teams or council committees. Next slide. The 6 items that we're presenting before you tonight will require essentially a nod of 5 from the full council before staff can move forward. Final solutions are not predetermined at this stage because we want to first understand if we have majority support for the work and to receive clarity of direction. As Nicole mentioned, I will present one item at a time and pause the presentation for discussion and direction on each item before moving to the next. And thanks in advance for the facilitation help. Next slide. Our first item this evening addresses our process for electing the mayor pro tem annually. The mayor pro tem has traditionally been selected using criteria of tenure on council. Usually, council selects the longest serving member of council who has not already served as mayor pro tem and wants to do so. This informal tradition is not written into council procedure, and as a result, the selection process may occasionally be questioned depending on whether or not members of council view the process as deferring to that tradition or as a competitive election. Next slide, please. Discussion by our process working group concluded with a desire to ensure that our mayor pro tem selection is transparent and predictable. They discussed that the tradition of tenure as a preferred qualification should either be formally codified or discontinued to enhance process transparency. And so tonight we do seek direction whether council desires to formalize the process for electing mayor pro tem beyond existing council procedure. And with that, I will turn that over to you, Councilmember Spear, for the first comment.
Wonderful, thank you. And could I see everybody? That's going to help me a little bit. And sorry, we're going to be putting up slides and pulling them down periodically. Okay, so my first question is, does anybody have any clarifying questions on this concept? Yes, Aaron.
Not on this one specifically, but Nicole wanted to check in. Matt had sent in some thoughts via hotline. Are we going to sort of include his thoughts as part of whether we get a nod of 5, or how are those going to be factored in?
That's a really good question. I mean, maybe let's just see what folks are, oh, sorry. I see Teresa come up, so I'm going to let her answer that.
Yeah, thanks. So an absent council member cannot participate in a nod of 5.
And let me rephrase that a little bit, because as I understand it, at a study session, we can't actually make a formal nod of 5, but we're giving direction. And correct me if I'm wrong about that. So given that slightly different context, is there any room for those comments?
Still no.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I don't, yeah. See, we can see where we get to if there's anything that is that close. And Lauren.
I just wanted to clarify what we mean by formalized. I saw, in the memo, it went into some specifics around like really how we could do this in a very formal way. But I could also see another option that is more like recording that this is our common practice, that isn't necessarily like, would that also be formalization in this sense?
Pam, would you like to answer that question, or Teresa?
Yeah, I was finding mute. I was going to defer to our city attorney if you have an opinion about the formality.
I do. I have opinions about all kinds of things, and this is one of them. So we do currently have a process outlined in the council procedure. So my recommendation would be that you codify a process that you're going to use.
Okay. Thank you.
That answer your question, Lauren?
It's a good answer.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So I'm going to pose the question then. And what I would hope people can do is just put up, oh, sorry, Ryan, I see you.
Sorry, that prompted another question for Teresa. Would it be sufficient to say that just for example, if we don't, can we decide that there is not a process in as much as it's a vote, and we are establishing that there has been a previous use or tendency to use tenure, we are now establishing that that is not something that we are adhering to, and it's just a vote. I mean, would that be sufficient?
So if you were to, if it was the will of council to do that, then I would suggest that you all revert to the process that is outlined in the council procedure rules, which just gives a process for the election itself.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark.
Nicole, I recall that you have submitted a proposed methodology for selection of the mayor pro tem. Teresa, have you looked at that, and does it have any defects that would need to be addressed? I thought it was a very substantive process.
Thanks for the question. It is a skeleton of a process that we could certainly flesh out and use as the basis if that's the will of council.
Okay. Then Nicole, I hope you will make that one of the choices.
Well, I think that the main kind of general concept question that we want to get at first is, and this just a show of hands, who is interested in formalizing the mayor pro tem election tradition that we use tenure into council procedure for future mayor pro tem elections, so that council is directed to select the senior most member of council who has not already served as mayor pro tem. And just show of hands if that is in alignment with what you would like. Okay, I see five people who are kind of interested in that idea. Does anybody have any high-level conceptual information or questions to offer as the city manager and city attorney staff consider ways to implement this process change? Yes, Aaron.
Just +1 Mark's positive review of your approach that you outlined, Nicole. So I would hope we could use that as the basis that the city attorney could then flesh out.
Anybody anybody have, just other ideas or anything you want to put out there, concerns, things you're hoping for, anything like that? Ryan.
Yeah, so my concern is that I've come to learn that this is a job, both the mayor and the mayor pro tem, that involve a lot of facilitation and time management, and are getting work done over the course of the year is so fundamentally about facilitation and time management. And Nicole, we have really benefited from you as somebody who has a lot of strength in this area. And so I didn't raise my hand earlier because I'm kind of interested in folks volunteering who have that and other qualifications. So I suppose if we go forward with a kind of a default for for tenure, I just would hope that there would be space in there to, if there's a clear case where somebody, maybe they wouldn't be running for it if not being told to because they have tenure, that they are they're given an off ramp, and we make it ideally, I don't know, clear, or a culture that you're not forced to do it. Especially if you don't feel like it's one of your strengths, and there's no shame in not doing it. I don't know how we would do that, but I guess I'm raising that as a concern. And thank you, by the way, for this incredible work on all of it, to put all this together. It's so easy to read, and the example for this one. So well done.
Thank you. And Taisha.
Yes, thank you. I echo Ryan's comments around, and especially since we've moved to an elected mayor, because we recognize, right, that there are skill sets that are needed, there are responsibilities. And although I appreciate always comments and recommendations by my colleague who is not here tonight, Matt, regarding not politicizing, I'm sorry, but there are so many critical decisions. Anytime a policy is being considered, that is policy, it is politics. And so it really is important. That is a lot of power to have those meetings and to be able to attend all year round, and not just for the however many times that mayor and mayor pro tem are allowed. So, and in addition, the facilitation and just the organization components are really, really critical. And just my general thinking, you know, when something isn't codified, like that's where equity goes to die. So I appreciate, and I wanted to echo others' comments on what was put together. My only consideration or issue is really around tenure. I really think that it should be focused. And even with the tenure, you're still not going to get to everyone. So what is the criteria? And I think there could be a broader conversation around the criteria that really is needed for that role, because it is different than serving as a member. So I think we need to honor that as well. So those are my primary concerns around moving forward. I agree with codification, but my primary concern is around tenure. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Pam, I was just going to ask if you wouldn't mind. One of the things that did make our top list from the working group was facilitation skills for council members. And so I was just wondering if you could maybe take a moment to speak to that as well, even though it's not something we're deciding on.
Yeah, happy to. There was a lot of support for that as we discussed with the process working group. Our intention at this time, given timing and workloads, is to do some research and create opportunities for that training to happen as part of the council onboarding process. So the first kind of iteration of providing that development would be this fall after the election. You know, certainly that said, as individuals become interested in various resources, we can explore that, but in a formal staff-driven way, it would be this fall.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, then I think, oh, yes, Tara.
I wouldn't say anything, but I just want to say that in the 3.5 years that I remember Mark's first comment was when he first started on council, he couldn't even find the bathroom. You know, Mark, I still remember that comment. That was pretty funny. And sometimes pushing yourself, I agree with you, Ryan. I can use myself as an example that I'm naturally not a facilitator, but I'm also naturally not a council member, right? So we grow and we learn and we try hard, and it's amazing sometimes that we can really get a lot better. And I think for Mayor Pro Tem, that gives each one of us is an elected official that deserves, in my opinion, to try to, if they want to be only Mayor Pro Tem, because we were elected and people voted for us and we got in. That's hard enough to do. So in that sense, I've grown to appreciate and agree totally with Nicole's hotline about process for this, because it gives people an opportunity to learn and grow, to try new things, become a great facilitator if they want to. But also if you've been on council a while and you still haven't gotten a chance because let's say your side, you know, didn't win or whatever, I also think that that's not really fair because we all did get fairly elected. So for that reason, that's what I really like about Nicole's many reasons. Well, there's many reasons I like what you said, Nicole, but those are my top reasons. So thank you for listening to my little spiel here.
Oh no, it looks like Nicole is frozen.
Yeah, she's
Maybe I could just
Okay.
give my
Okay.
comment.
Okay, Lauren, you're next. Sorry, my internet blipped.
So I guess one of my concerns with formalizing this process is sort of the uncertainty of the future. And while I might be okay with this process right now, I do worry that part of that is because I trust our current mayor a lot. But being that the mayor is directly elected, that might not always be the case. And there might be a reason, a certain skill set or a certain something that is really concerning that they lack, that we might want to balance out with who we appoint to mayor pro tem, that might not be considered in a formalization of these. And that's sort of my main concern with creating an expectation that we might not follow in the future.
Great, thank you. So staff, just some other things to kind of think about as we move forward with thinking about this one. So, and sorry, my intention for having a little bit of time for comments is just to raise any other issues or things that staff might consider as they're putting this together, not necessarily to like go back and forth on the merits of it, because otherwise we really will be here for much longer than an hour. So, okay, can we move on to landmarks? Is that all right? And thank you everybody for your comments.
Yes, appreciate the feedback. And if we could get the slides back up on slide 7, that would be great. Thank you. So our next item is related to historic preservation items, with the council concern that arose that landmark reviews are taking up too much council meeting time. I wanted to provide a little context on this one. Currently, the code does require council review for certain types of historic preservation applications. Over the last 5 years, council has spent an average of 3 hours and 10 minutes of meeting time per year on historic preservation items. This is less than 2% of total council meeting time per year. The largest volume of these items are in routine call-ups and consent agenda items, while the largest amount of time is for landmark and historic district designations. And what we see is that the majority of simple designations, which are typically owner nominated, take about 10 to 15 minutes each at about 4 public hearings per year, where complex designations, which are typically third-party nominated or city-owned, they average just about 1 per year, but do take an average about 2 hours each. Next slide. The desired outcome discussed at the council working group is that landmark reviews take less time from council. Given the context on the previous slide, I will share that our staff assessment does not indicate that landmark items take disproportionate council meeting time, given that it is currently less than 2%. However, the team did want to bring forward some options that would reduce council review of landmark items, which would need to be done through a future code amendment. This can include shifting from a call-up period or an appeals process for landmark boards' decisions on landmark alteration certificates. While council's meeting time is not significant for these call-ups, the current process does require that the property owner must wait 3 weeks after a landmarks board meeting for a final decision and approximately 3 hours of staff time for each call-up. In total, moving from a call-up to an appeals process could save a property owner 3 weeks of time and reduce staff time by 24 hours per year. Another idea is to change from an automatic public hearing to a call-up item for landmark and historic district designations. This likely would not impact the more complex designations, but it could reduce council time on some landmark items by about an hour a year. Depending on the scope of our proposed changes, this project will require significant time from both our city attorney's office and planning and development services team. And I also do wish to note that later this year, city staff are preparing to scope an update to the overarching historic preservation plan. So there will be future opportunities to discuss items of interest not directly related to the question before you tonight. Our direction sought this evening is whether council would like to investigate options for revising city code to reduce the requirement for city council review of historic preservation items.
Thank you so much, Pam. And we've got clarifying questions on the concept, not sort of our opinions on it, just clarifying questions at the moment. Lauren, were you first? Yeah, Lauren.
I just wanted to ask about the logic of potentially trying to look at this at the same time as we look at the update to our landmark ordinances. Would there be an efficiency there? And if we gave direction now, could we roll it into that future project? Just if there is efficiency in looking at them together.
Thank you for that. I do want to, I think, phone a friend. I have Marcy and KJ here. They would know a little bit more about the process of scoping that future look at the program, and was trying to keep them off camera tonight, but I don't want to misspeak about that future project.
Sure. Thanks, Pam. Good evening, Council. Christopher Johnson, Comprehensive Planning Senior Manager. To answer your question, Lauren, I do think there probably would be some time savings and efficiency to have a conversation around. any code changes as part of a larger conversation about the landmark program itself. And the historic preservation plan really serves as our strategic plan for the program and is updated on about a 10-year cadence. So we'll be diving pretty deeply into into the program itself and into the plan. And there could certainly be some code changes that would come out of that would be appropriate at that time.
Thank you.
You.
Lauren, did that get it? Okay. And Mark, clarifying question.
Not really. I just want to say that if Lauren's concept can produce efficiencies of time, I think it makes sense.
Okay. Great, thank you. And so I think that the main question for us is if we would like staff to investigate options for revising city code to reduce the requirement for city council review of historic preservation items. So like, we're not talking about this sort of code option. This is just kind of a separate is anybody interested in that? Please put up your hand if so. And that's separate. I'll mention the code thing next. Okay, I see one. So, okay. So I think then what you were mentioning, Pam, around and Lauren, just around as we're working on this, if there are things that come up that seem like they may be time savers, feel free to bring them to us. But we're not asking you to scope a specific thing to reduce the time we're spending on it. Does that offer enough clarity?
I believe it does. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Oh, and maybe I should just check to make sure. Are there who agrees that as staff is working on this, if they see things that could make the process a little bit more efficient for council, that would be something to look at along the lines of what Lauren and Pam were talking about. Okay. Okay, cool. Anybody have any additional questions or comments on that? Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Emily, if I could get slide 9 up, please. Our third item prioritized by the working group relates to full participation in council employee performance review questionnaires. Currently, all council members are invited to provide input on council employee performance through the annual evaluation questionnaires. And the Council Employee Evaluation Committee provides one-on-one feedback to the city manager, city attorney, and municipal judge. While the full body is invited to provide feedback, council employees have not always received feedback from all 9 council members in previous years. Next slide. The process working group requested that we explore opportunities to ensure every council member provides evaluation feedback about each council employee during annual reviews. Mandatory participation in annual reviews for council employees would require a change to council procedure, and accountability would have to be managed by city council as a self-regulating body. And so our question before you tonight is whether council desires to proceed with formalizing mandatory council member participation in all council employee performance reviews.
Thank you. We'll start with any clarifying questions on the concept here. Tina.
Yeah, a quick question. We have a review committee, correct? Is the review committee looking at adding an executive session under personnel matters so that there could be a group discussion listening to each other about performance? Is that already being contemplated?
We haven't talked about that at all as part of it. So traditionally there is an evaluation that folks are filling out with similar questions from year to year. Every council member is asked multiple times to fill that out, and then performance evaluations are determined based on the overall scoring of that. So we have not traditionally had that sort of discussion. So I think that might be a slightly different question than what's going on here. So that may be something else to talk about.
Yeah, and I think I'm asking it because it might achieve the same outcome in a different way. So I just am throwing it out there for people to consider as we think about holding each other accountable in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark, clarifying questions.
Yes, my question is, what is the remedy for this? Will we be getting demerits? Will we be flogged in the town square? I mean, if one does not comply, what's the remedy?
Yep, I think it's a really good question.
We can be told we're a bad council member, but that's about it.
Yep, have to wear a little cap for a few meetings or something. Ryan.
As a member of the employee committee, I would be happy to read a list of the remaining folks who have not yet filled this out. If you work at an organization, this is not something that you have a choice about. And this is not only that, but this is the right thing to do, given the importance of this. So that would be my proposal, that a member of the committee read who's remaining. Somebody, maybe Matt, had suggested docking pay. I don't know if we can do that. That might be too far, but anyway, I'll offer my services.
Thanks, Ryan. And Taisha.
You know, I'm interested in hearing the response to Tina's recommendation around, now that we have executive session, perhaps that's an opportunity that would mitigate this. But if it is not, one other recommendation I would have is just to publish whoever responded to the our community has a right to know whether or not you did this part of your duty or not. So my preference would be to just, inclusive of whatever ways, we can report out who participated and who didn't. I think that our community has a right to know. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark, and then I see Ryan again.
I just to say, I like that suggestion. And by the way, I am one of the guilty parties. And I failed to submit the form for one of our council employees who I had not had a conversation with, did not have personal knowledge of, and was absolutely unqualified to judge job performance. And I'm happy to stand in front of anybody and say that's why I did it. And maybe I should have remedied that situation, but I had not at the time that our opinions were solicited. And so rather than simply checking off boxes, I declined. And put that up in lights if you'd like. I stand by it.
Thanks, Mark. Be on Ryan's list. Ryan.
Thanks. I just wanted to address the couple of folks asking about the executive session idea. And Nicole, you and I are on the employer committee. I'm just wondering if maybe, I guess I would propose as a counter proposal that the employee committee come to with a recommendation to consider. I do think there are some dynamics that I don't know that we should be trying to decide on the spot. For example, if we brought everybody together, we would have, Teresa is one of our employees. She would be at the executive session. Maybe that works. Maybe that, I don't know. But I would, if folks would be willing, I would suggest that perhaps the committee come back with the recommendations and considerations. I don't know if, Nicole, that's appropriate.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a separate conversation from the one that we're sort of having. So I would prefer to not have that conversation tonight. Partly so that, again, we can stay on track. Tara.
Two quick things because it's already 8:32 and I got my shows to watch. The first thing isn't it better that it's private, even though I understand what Tina's saying, or is it not private?
So we're not having that conversation.
Oh, we're not doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
Then the only thing that I have to say is that I agree with Mark in that I did a lot of N/A because a lot of the questions I had no idea the answer and I didn't really want to guess. I just didn't feel like it was my place. So is it possible that we do fill it in, but if we feel we're not, it's not if we don't know somebody, why would we weigh in? Can we just write NA on all the questions? I can't remember if we're allowed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we're council members. We can kind of do what we want here, but I think that, the main reason that this sort of came forward, and just divert back to that for a moment, is that, you know, the raises, the merits, all of this, it's based on our responses in part. It's also based on a, you know, broader ratings from, you know, peers and everything, but we are a part of that, right? And if one council employee or two are not getting the full benefit of having us all weigh in, that means that whoever is responding kind of has more of a say for that person than
I see.
others, right? Because it's sort of all, you know, averaged together and things. So that's really it. So
That makes
maybe
sense.
if I could just sort of summarize what I'm hearing here, that we don't necessarily need it to formalize a mandatory council member participation in the council employee performance review. But Ryan has committed to reading a list of people who don't respond. And, you know, maybe Ryan, you and I can kind of talk as the employee evaluation committee too, just about ways that we can try to encourage people earlier to get to know our staff and the work they do, so that you do feel that you can fill out those forms and be a contributing member to their score from council. So that's what, maybe just raise your hands if you really want to vote on, or not vote, sorry, if you're wanting to kind of straw poll this idea of formalizing a mandatory council member participation. All right, Aaron. I saw your hand go up. Was that a?
I thought we were straw polling.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yeah. That was, I saw one then.
I think I said two, but definitely not a majority.
Yep. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks, Taisha.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think there's some more information that we would like to receive, I think, before, if it would be possible to revisit this one once we have more information, I think, particularly around executive sessions and how we can perhaps reimagine our whole process now that that is a option. So I you know, again, thank you.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. Brian, I hear that you and I have some homework is what I'm kind of hearing. And let me just ask, just to kind of make sure that folks here are in line, can you raise your hand if you would like Ryan and me to just kind of think about how we can do this? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Lauren looks confused. I think I didn't specify exactly what it is we're thinking about, but just Ryan and I will come back with some creative ideas that involve Ryan reading a list, and we will report back to everybody. Okay.
So Councilmember Spear, thank you for that. And just to clarify, essentially what I'm hearing is kind of refer this issue generally back to convene the council performance evaluation committee to really kind of talk through some different options. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not necessarily like revisit the whole process or anything like that. Like I didn't. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anybody feels like that was what they're saying, raise your hand now. But that to me feels like a whole other thing that's involving more work from Ryan and me that I'm not super excited about taking on right now. Okay. Great. So does that, did you get clarity there, Pam?
I did. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Then I think we can move on to our next topic.
Okay, thank you. We are now on our fourth item of the evening. Emily, slide 11, please. Thank you. Our fourth item that the council working group prioritized relates to concerns about usage of community member email addresses or other information for purposes beyond official city council communication. Currently, city council members do gain access to community member email addresses and other details in their official capacity through correspondence from the public. There's no formal policy regulating the use of this information. Next slide. Discussion among the process working group concluded that council should consider whether to establish rules and procedures related to communication privacy and information sharing, specifically regarding community email addresses. And so we're seeking direction tonight whether council desires us to pursue establishing rules prohibiting the use of community member email addresses or other information outside of official capacity.
Great, thank you. We will start with clarifying questions. Anybody have any questions on the concept being presented here? Yes, Tina.
Yeah, do we have any rules about other personally identifiable information, just like a street address or And anything about information that we get through, or how much of this information is available through our email to the community? We've made all those emails public. Are the email addresses public as well that the public can access? No, they just see the email that a community, okay. Thank you.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we had this discussion, I think a year or two ago, and as staff, if I'm misremembering, please correct me, but the issue is that the public does not have access to that information. Lauren.
Could a Quora request make that information public? Like, could someone Quora all people who've emailed us on a particular topic?
Teresa.
Certainly somebody could submit a Quora request like that. If it takes more than an hour, there's a cost associated with that. But also it is our policy that we redact email addresses.
Thank you.
Helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Any other clarifying questions on this concept? All right, then please raise your hand if you would like to establish rules prohibiting the use of community member email addresses for purposes other than replying to community inquiries in council members' official capacity as elected officials. All right. Then I would ask if anybody has any high-level conceptual information or questions to offer our staff as they consider ways to implement this process change. Yes, Lauren.
I guess I would just say that because sometimes these conversations evolve, right? Someone reaches out through email and maybe there's a back and forth over time. I think that there could be a scenario where a use of an email address might go beyond that initial request, and that might make sense and be an okay thing. And I think we want to allow for that. But, you know, my concern is more around kind of like the collection of email address, like broader scale collecting email addresses for personal gain or distribution kinds of things.
Mark.
I think that's a good point. If you've gone back and forth 3 times with somebody and you've actually established a bit of a relationship with them, I don't know if there's any harm in being able to maintain that communication at will, as opposed to just, you know, downloading 150 people who've emailed us on an issue that you happen to agree with that position and collecting email addresses for campaign purposes.
Thank you.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, yep. And I would agree with that too. And just as we're thinking about this stuff, just, you know, some way, I mean, there may be somebody that emails me or council, and it's clear they're very interested in some topic. And then, you know, I may hear about something that's going on in community and want to let them know or something like that, right? Just of how do we sustain, you know, or pull people back into conversations where relevant. I think Lauren and Mark make a good point there. So does that offer you enough to move forward, Teresa? Yeah.
Wouldn't that still be in your official capacity?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yes. So that language may be sufficient. And Aaron, did you want to colloquy?
Well, just I think it might encompass something where, you know, you had learned enough about somebody that you might email them personally about some different topic. Like, oh, you mentioned that you love this kind of ice cream. They're having that kind of ice cream festival next week. You know, FYI, you might enjoy that. So it seems like you might be able to send a relevant personal email.
Brian.
Do we currently have a policy that prohibits adding people to a newsletter or a large group correspondence, opting them in without the permission, or do we not have that on the books? Okay, to me that seems like the probably majority issue here, and most newsletters, you know, sort of that's best practice anyway. But to me, that seems like the real kind of need here is to clarify that we should not, as a newsletter writer myself, yeah, I should not be opting anybody in to a newsletter, but people have the opportunity to do it on their own. To me, that seems like something we should both specify in a policy like this, and it also seems like it's, in my mind, probably most of what matters.
Great, thank you. Any other high-level conceptual information? Teresa, everyone, do you feel like you have what you need from us?
I do. Pam?
I do.
Great, then I think we can move on to number 5.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Emily. We are on slide 13. Our 5th item prioritized relates to the potential desire to make public speaking at city events and council agenda committee substitute or fill-in opportunities more equitably available to all council members. Current council procedure describes that the mayor has discretion whenever possible to share responsibilities equitably among the other council members, but there is no formal procedure for doing so. CAC absences are currently managed by council procedure, requiring that substitutes should be solicited from all council members whenever a CAC member cannot attend a meeting. And if more council members wish to attend, then there are vacancies, the mayor makes the appointment. The current language does not identify a time frame for response. And so sometimes what we observe is one person responds saying they can do it and they immediately get appointed. Next slide. Process working group members supported bringing forward a council discussion about making CAC substitute and public event participation opportunities to be shared among council members in a more predictable and equitable way. Considerations for you to consider include that council procedure does not currently define a role for city staff in administering the sharing of ceremonial and other responsibilities among council members. And should council ask staff to outline and administer a formal process, there are staff capacity constraints to consider depending on the future frequency and lead time of event opportunities. Today, we seek some direction related to whether council desires to formalize a process for sharing fill-in opportunities for ceremonial, CAC, and other duties. And if so, is it the preference for staff to begin administering that process versus the mayoral discretion? And that is it.
Great, thank you for the summary. Do folks have clarifying questions on this concept? Yep, Aaron.
Well, Nicole, I just had something I wanted to raise before we did this straw poll. It's not a question per se. Is now the right time to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I would just say I support the concept of this. I think that just the question is kind of a amount of time and resources involved. That the requests to speak often come in with a relatively constrained time frame, and people often want a response pretty quickly. And so the time the amount of time it takes to kind of maybe potentially poll everybody and then get an answer and then get back to people who are organizing an event is probably going to be longer than they would like, and maybe often longer than is practical for filling the slot. So, and then somebody would have to manage that sort of kind of, oh, nobody's answered that one yet. They said they might have. And so anyway, it's just kind of a management issue. And it's why I, as currently as the mayor, don't have a formal process for that, because I personally don't have time to manage it. So if we do that, which I think could be positive, it would just need to be eyes wide open that it would need to be a process that would need some fairly intensive management.
Thank you. Tara.
So I guess my question is, if someone says we want the mayor, what do we say? No? I mean, the mayor was the elected mayor. So I feel like it's, is it really right to say you can't have the mayor? So that's why I'm not going to vote this way, but that's my question and comment.
Thank you. Felt like a little bit of a rhetorical question. So unless somebody's
no, I mean, really, can you tell me?
Yeah.
No, I'm for sure. I mean, that is a question like, can we say, no, you can't? I meant it.
I don't know. Mark. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, Teresa, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I can answer that. So the mayor is the ceremonial head pursuant to at least the code, but perhaps the charter as well. Forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head. And so it is certainly the mayor's discretion whether to share those opportunities or not. You all have codified in your council procedure that those opportunities should be shared when the opportunity arises. I don't think the question is about whether to share those opportunities if it arises. I think the question is more here about, and Pam, please correct me if I'm wrong. The question more is about, do you all want a more formalized process for doing so?
That's exactly right. Teresa, thank you for that. And, you know, as previously mentioned in a couple of the questions and comments so far, if we were to further codify what that process looks like, frankly, it would need to be quite strict, and we would need council support that as staff members who support the administration of these things, we would need to just be able to follow kind of the letter of a future procedure. So it would be things like a rotation base, so we know who to call first, second, third. You have 5 hours to respond, and then you have to be okay moving on to the next person, et cetera. So it would have certainly a high level of detail and require really your support.
Great. Thank you, Pam. And thanks, Teresa, for the question. I saw more hands go up. Tara, is that an old hand there? You have, okay, then Mark.
This seems to me to be a lot of drafting and a lot of procedure, and I don't know that it will create the kinds of results that we want. I am more than happy to rely upon the fundamental fairness of the mayor, this mayor, next mayor, whatever mayor, to do these things correctly. And I just don't know that we need to, wade through a lot of additional bureaucracy in terms of how these things are done. That's just how I feel about it. I'm assuming, Aaron will behave in a just fashion, but more than that, the next mayor beyond that, I expect to do the same, and the mayor beyond that as well. So I just don't think we're going to get a lot of bang for our buck here in terms of the efforts to put this together, formulate it, and adhere to it. My preference would be not to go forward.
Thank you. Aaron?
I will say that if we don't move forward with something more formal, something that I personally would find helpful in doing a better job, because I will admit that I do not do a perfect job of this, a better job of distributing these, is if I had a sense of different council members' interest in speaking events and which kinds of events they would like to speak at. Because certainly when I hear about an event and I know it has a nexus with a council member's interests, I try my best to invite them instead. But I don't know everybody's interests. And I do sometimes reach out to people and they say, I don't care about that topic, or you know what, I'm busy, I don't really need to do something like that. So if there were just like something on an online spreadsheet or something where people kind of recorded those things, that would help me do a better job, just mentioned.
Great. Thank you. So I am really not hearing much support for this one, but just to check, who would like to formalize a process for sharing fill-in opportunities? And anybody there? I got one.
I mean, not if it's crazy burden for staff, but if there's any way to do it in a
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe so maybe not a formal process. One thing that I am wondering though, because I think that part of this is really about transparency. And so I was just wondering if we could potentially think about changing the section that says whenever possible, the mayor shall, to say when the mayor is unavailable, the mayor shall. Because that to me is more transparent. It's not kind of setting the expectation that these might be shared. Sometimes whenever possible, whatever that means, but really just states that. So I'm just curious if people have thoughts on that. Tina.
I have a different thought, but I do like that thought too.
Yes, what is your thought?
I think my other interest is knowing when the mayor is out speaking on behalf of the city, not in their individual capacity. I think that might be a big lift, but sometimes I am surprised at how many different places the city voice is being, projected out. And sometimes I'll go to an event and not realize that the mayor is going to be speaking. So, and you always do a great job, Erin. Thank you. But that's like something that's not a big deal, but I wouldn't mind knowing if there's a schedule.
If I may address that comment, Tina, I will remind you all that our city council program manager does maintain the city council calendar of events. And we really rely on you all to inform us when there are events to sort of help build that awareness. So I actually believe the infrastructure exists. But to your point, even we don't always know exactly what is of council interest. And so I would just re-encourage all of you, please send those things our way when you believe it kind of falls within the category that Councilmember Marquis was just describing, because I think that tool can continue to lift awareness.
Thank you. And Erin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and just to Tina, that certainly if there were like a decent document that available that I could just fill out like a spreadsheet to list that, I'd be happy to do that. I will say that oftentimes I don't know that I'm speaking until the event. You know, you show up at something and at a certain point it's like, hey, would you say a couple words? Yeah, sure, yes. So there's always that caveat. It may not be on a list and it might still happen.
Thank you. And is anybody interested in potentially changing the language? I know I sort of just slid a new one in there, so it's okay if not, but is anybody else interested in changing that language to say when the mayor is unavailable, the mayor shall attempt? And staff, have I just like done anything to you all in putting that in there? Seems fairly straightforward.
I'll defer to city attorney who would be writing the language on that and bringing it back to you.
Yeah, that's totally doable.
Okay.
What I don't feel like we have clarity around yet though is CAC fill-ins.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for that. Is that anything that would folks like staff to explore a process, a more formal process for CAC fill-ins? Yes, Lauren.
I think that the question around like a time period for which we solicit a CAC fill-in is one that I think would be good to clarify. Like, what is the expectation in terms of response time, or that the mayor should wait before appointing someone?
Thanks for that. I do believe that we have varying amounts of time by which we have noticed that someone is unavailable. And so I think if we were to kind of implement something like that, we would have to do it in such a way, you know, if someone wakes up ill, for example, and sends an email at 5 a.m. and two of you happen to see it and can jump on, great, you know, but we're not going to wait 6 hours in that situation. So it is a little bit flexible in our experience. You know, we could certainly attempt to accommodate council direction in that, or we could give the mayor informal advice on kind of what to do in the event that there's large interest.
I guess I could see it being like up to 24 hours in advance. This is the expectation or something like that. And after that, all bets are off.
And maybe if I may, it could be depending on when the request comes in, it could be that there is a deadline placed. I will wait until such time before appointing, and then people have to put an interest in, but just putting a thought out there.
So might I just note, just because we've got very little time remaining and one of our bigger items, are folks interested in thinking about, maybe not like formalizing in our code, but just in our processes and operations, formalizing what exactly it is with the timing, and who's going to be notified, as Lauren, as we were just saying. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Does everybody have, Pam, Teresa, Nuria, do you have what you need on this one?
Yeah, if I may ask for a little latitude, I think we can work with our city clerk team and Mayor Brockett to try some things and start based on when we receive requests, set some timing, and just check in with you if we feel like it's working.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, on to our last one.
Okay, thank you. And we are now on slide 15. Okay, so our declarations process was another one that came up with our process working group, and that it is not comprehensive and clearly defined, or frankly, our practices aren't completely aligned with what is written in council rule of procedure, as well as declarations taking significant meeting time. So there's kind of a few concerns rolled into one on this one. I have a little bit of context, so bear with me here. Our current city practices only partially align with council procedure. The parts that really do is that we rely heavily on the mayor to screen all declaration requests. From there, we do present recommendations for read aloud declarations, so declarations that take meeting time on the CAC agenda, and those get reviewed by CAC on a rolling basis. Where our current practice deviates from existing rules of procedure, our rules state that declaration requests can be initiated by a group with substantial local support. However, that isn't defined particularly well in our common understanding at the city. And staff observed over the years that several declarations were being requested and approved annually that were consistently important to the mayor and council. So 4 or 5 years ago, we did create a process where we would have an annual calendar of anticipated declarations rather than waiting for the community to initiate every single request and then staff find themselves behind on getting the declarations produced in time. We also experience that declarations are frequently requested by council members or city staff members, which may not qualify as a group with substantial local support for the purposes of the current council procedure. The rules of procedure also assume that declarations are issued by the mayor unless CAC specifically asked for them to issue by the full council. That practice fell by the wayside, largely as a result of council member desire to alternate reading declarations in a regular rotation. And when you do that, it's sort of illogical to have a different council member read a declaration in the voice of the mayor. It just kind of feels funky. So we adapted some of our language to our declarations. Finally, our rules of procedure assume that all declarations are issue only unless specifically a CAC scheduling request is presented and CAC deliberates whether or not to read it aloud. Our current practice essentially is that when we seek mayoral direction on a particular declaration, we often then move them straight to the agenda for read aloud if there's a belief that this will have significant community interest. Next slide. Our consensus among the process working group was to improve the city declaration process in some way to be more comprehensive, easy to understand, and transparent for all of our audiences, council members, community members, and the city staff who administer it, as well as reduce time taken overall for the development and presentation of declarations. Staff does estimate that nearly 6 hours per year are spent reading declarations in council meetings, and we hear from the community that while symbolic celebration and recognition can be important, thoughtful and meaningful connections between community and council members builds greater trust and is more valuable on the whole. Direction tonight is kind of being sought in 2 parts. We're interested in hearing council's long-term hopes for the overall declarations process, but also how to approach upcoming declarations in the interim. So our first piece is whether we'd like to know whether council supports moving forward with a full declarations policy review and potential redesign that we would bring back to you all. And if yes, while that work is underway, how would council like to proceed with current declarations? Shall the 4 currently scheduled to be read aloud in meetings through the end of April remain on the agenda, and new declarations be issued and not read, for example, until this process improvement is implemented? That was a short summary of a big topic, so feel
Yes.
free to ask questions.
Thank you, Pam. And I just want to reiterate, we are not trying to redesign this process tonight. We are really just looking for overall, is this something that we would like to do? And Pam, I'm just going to start out with a clarifying question. It was a recommendation from the process working group that we consider doing a full, like a redesign, correct?
That's the way we interpreted the conversation, certainly.
Yep, thank you. Tara.
Just a quick question. Pam, when you look at the April, you know how sometimes we can't even find somebody to accept the declaration? Is it possible to omit and put into the IP the declarations where it seems like it doesn't matter or we can't find people to receive it? Or you think it's inappropriate?
Yeah, Council Member Weiner, that's a bit of a nuanced question. We don't always seek a recipient depending on the content of the declaration. So for example, next week we have the Boulder Strong Day of Remembrance declaration. That specific declaration is really intended to be the voice of council speaking to all of community. And so to have a specific recipient in that case was deemed sort of not the goal. In other cases, when we have declarations that are certainly when they're honoring a specific group or when they're a topic that ties to a community group of strong interest, and council brings forward a potential connection or suggestion, then we do that. So certainly that would be something to explore if we were to move forward in a larger process redesign, is when do we invite folks or not, etc.
Sorry, I asked. Forget a dumb question. Move on.
Ian.
Just a question about the split between declarations that we read aloud, which is what I think people often think of when we say declarations, between those and the other declarations that are in the packet but we don't read. Is there any, sorry if I'm putting you on the spot, but just generally?
Generally, we issue more than we read aloud. So we have an informal practice of no more than 2 declarations to be read aloud in a meeting. For example, and I was supplied with some good back pocket information, between now and the end of April, what we currently have on deck scheduled is 4 declarations to be read aloud, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 or 11 declarations that are issue only.
Okay, so 2 or 3 times more. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I want to separate out this question of what we do with current declarations that are scheduled or others that are kind of pending, and what we do moving forward. So first question, and again, trying to separate out things that are pending. Are we interested in moving forward with a full declarations policy and process redesign? Okay, great. So we have an answer to that. And then the second question was, what are we going to do with the declarations that are either already on the CAC agenda or are pending? So we have at least one that I believe is still pending. I don't know if there are others that we've maybe already committed to beyond April. So what are we going to do about that? Aaron.
May I make a suggestion? So as we know, we have that calendar of declarations that are scheduled throughout the year. So my suggestion would be to continue with what's on the calendar in terms of being read aloud or not read aloud until we have the new process in place. And in the meantime, if there are additional requests from the community for read aloud declarations, that those go to CAC consideration.
And I just maybe one follow-up question on that. How much time do you think staff this might take to get something in place, redesign and get something else in place?
So I'm thinking through our current work plan, and the same staff working on agenda management, transition, boards and commissions are kind of the same staff that would be working through this item. And certainly the procedure would require further discussion with council. I mean, I certainly think that we can land the new process kind of before the end of this council term, but it may very well take a few months to work through the different options and then ultimately have a new procedure passed by council. Is that specific enough for you?
Yeah, no, it is. And if I may, just as long as I'm speaking, I think I worry then a little bit about kind of sticking to the current list of read alouds, because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. And so what I might suggest is that ones that we have already committed to reading aloud in some fashion, those will be the ones that we maybe stick with, and the others perhaps not read aloud unless one of us requests it specifically. So that would be my proposal there. Erin, is that an old hand you have up, or did you have something else? Okay, let's see, Mark, I think you're next.
Do
Yes.
you mind if I respond to that as well? Thinking through the proposal Mayor Brockett put on the table and then that comment, what we also could do is bring the calendar before seats related to the read alouds as they go along as scheduling items, and include kind of both the calendar and any new requests, and treat them kind of as a CAC decision versus our kind of default practice of mayoral suggestion. But I'll allow the conversation to continue, of course.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I may be the only one on this, but I think there's something important and very human about reading declarations to the community, and you know, whether it's Immigration Month or it's the recognition of Dick Jesser as a remarkable individual. I think we can save a lot of time, and if we can limit all declarations to 300 words, and you know, not make them 15-minute productions. But I think there's something very nice about recognizing important dates in our history, or important issues that we want to highlight, and important people in our community. And so I would want us to continue to do so under this structure or any new structure.
Yep, thank you. So just some comments on things to think about as we're redesigning. Taisha.
I'm fine with the full review. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the current one that is in limbo regarding anti-Muslim hate, and just a concern around having to have that community weight, and just more in general, you know, even if we do have a full council review or even a CAC review, it goes back to the conversation I said before. All of us are not present at CAC reviews, and so that is not even a majority of the council that are making decisions at that point. So I have significant concerns there. In addition, when a community group is not represented on our council when we're making these decisions, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. And so even when we are going to be talking about the anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate declaration, we have zero representation of those community groups on our council right now. And so I have some concerns there as to a process section or question as it relates to that. And just in general, have concerns around the current separate but equal process that we've used for that. So not sure, you know, where all of those comments fit, but I look forward to a fuller review. I'm wondering if we could potentially identify kind of like tiers or prioritize the process so that we're not waiting until the very end, but there's maybe some components that we can decide sooner rather than later that would allow us to proceed and not have to wait a potential 3 to 6 months to revisit this critical issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I think those are things that it sounds like just kind of taking into account comments as we are starting to think about what this redesign might look like. Thank you. And Tina.
And I'm commenting on the interim. I'm fine with what Aaron said, although the only thing would be if it's a repeat declaration and there's not a community member receiving it and there's a new request. I would just like us to think about maybe replacing them and moving one to the undeclared piece, but maintaining the 2 per meeting and not extend it to 3 where possible, just in interest of time.
Thank you. Okay, so I heard a couple potential routes here, what Aaron put forward, that kind of all the ones that were listed in that initial list of things we were going to be reading aloud this year, the calendar that was set up in advance, still read those aloud. And what I was suggesting was maybe just think about the ones that we've committed to reading aloud, and then and committed in the sense that we have people or there is a declaration pending, like the anti-Muslim hate declaration. And just moving forward with those, with the idea that if anybody wanted one of the other ones to be read aloud, they could ask CAC for that, and CAC could consider it, kind of a little hybrid between current practice and what's in the rules. So I'm going to categorize those as all and some. So who would like the all? Who would like the some? Okay, who doesn't really care? Or is just deeply confused? Yes, Teresa.
I believe some got 5 in the straw poll.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. I did see 1 or 2 confused faces. So if there is anything that you would like to try to clarify in our last minute, feel free to do so. Yes, Aaron.
Yeah, so that's totally fine. That works out. I will just say that I think that some of those that were scheduled to be read aloud later on this year are have groups associated with them that have been coming each year and will most likely expect to come back or be quite disappointed if they're not brought back. So I think we probably want to spend a few minutes looking over that list and thinking about which ones fall into that category to maybe make a specific CEC request about.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, then just leave that to whoever would like that, can make that CAC request. Okay.
Councilmember Spear, can I repeat back
Yes.
what I think is
Yes.
happening?
Yeah. Please.
Just
Yeah.
to
Thank you.
be
Sorry, I was so
totally
excited
clear.
when we're done.
No, I want to spare my team members any future confusion. So we will take a look at the existing read aloud calendar for the year, and we will do a quick assessment to decide who has a committed recipient and or where do we have specific associated community groups that we sort of know there's an expectation. But if there are some we've identified as read aloud that are kind of just floating because they're associated with a holiday and don't have a commitment, we'll move those to issue only. And then we will provide that list to council for visibility. Or would you like to?
Sorry, that's not what I heard, ma'am.
Okay, so we can just do that assessment as staff,
yeah,
and bring it forward on the agenda. Okay.
Let me make sure I heard back, and just to make sure. I mean, what I heard is that what we are committed to is taking the CAC agenda, and for everyone that we already have currently on the agenda, we are committed to reading aloud, and those that we have already approved. So for example, the anti-Muslim hate, even though it's not currently scheduled, that has been approved. So when that comes forward, we will read that aloud. And any others that will come along, if a council member is interested, they will request that to CAC. The additional thing, I believe, Mayor, correct me if I'm incorrect, is that to your point about there are some existing, and I think, Pam, I think this is what you were getting to, if there are some existing declarations that when we look at the list, we anticipate have been around for so long, our pollinator, for example, declaration, that we have such expectations in community that perhaps those staff can take a look at that list, and we can certainly provide that to council so that you can bring that forward as a CAC request yourselves and point that out, but that we should be thoughtful about making sure that that comes forward, because we know that there are expectations in community. Am I saying that correctly?
That, Nuria, you hit it how I did, but if anybody that does not jive with what everybody else is walking away with, you have 30 seconds. Maybe not even 30. Okay.
We'll be thoughtful about that list to make sure we identify those.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, we have made it through. I just want to thank everybody else on the process working group. Really, really appreciate all the work that that went in to get us to tonight. Thank you, Pam, Nuria, Teresa, for all the work that you all have put in on this too. And I think, yeah, was Megs also helping with us with this a little bit too. So thank you to Megs as well. So I just really, really appreciate everything that went in here. So does anybody else have anything else to say?
Thank you, Nicole. This is a huge amount of work, and yeah, appreciate all of everything that went into this. Great work.
Ryan, you rock.
Yeah, great job keeping us on track. Thanks, Nicole.
Almost 4 minutes.
So
4 minutes over. Anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you for your time, and thanks again, staff, for helping us tonight.